Welcome to Night Cosmos Sleep. Humanity may be able to build a spacecraft powerful enough to cross millions of kilometers to Mars. But inside that metal shell is another vessel, far more fragile: the human body. Throughout the journey, our bones, muscles, blood, eyes, cells, and even the mind itself will be constantly changing to adapt to an environment evolution never prepared us to face. The frightening part is not that the body may fail to adapt, but that it may adapt too well to space, gradually forgetting how to function in a world shaped by gravity. So, what begins to happen from the very moment the body leaves behind the familiar rules of Earth? During the first few minutes after leaving the launch pad, the human body can still feel its weight very clearly. The engines drive the spacecraft upward, and the acceleration presses the astronauts firmly into their seats, making their arms difficult to lift and their helmets seem heavier than usual. Even each breath requires more effort because the chest must expand against a powerful force. Although the ground is already falling away far below, the body is still living in a world with an up, a down, and a distinct force holding everything in place. Then the acceleration phase ends. The roar of the engines fades, and the pressure across the chest and back disappears almost instantly. A pen beside the control panel slowly rises from the surface, turns gently, and hovers in front of the nearest astronaut. A cable that had been lying still begins to curve upward, while small droplets of water gather into transparent spheres instead of falling. When the astronauts release their restraints, they do not stand up as they would on Earth. A slight movement of the shoulder is enough to carry the entire body away from the seat and into the middle of the cabin. No feet touch the floor, no weight passes through the knees, and there is no sensation of falling downward or rising upward. The body simply floats there, so light that it almost feels unreal. The change happens with astonishing speed, while the brain is still trying to understand what has just occurred. People often assume that they remain upright because of their legs, but the sense of balance is actually created by several systems working together. The eyes observe the position of objects and the movement of the surrounding space. The inner ear contains tiny structures that help determine whether the body is tilting, rotating, or accelerating in a particular direction. The muscles, joints, and skin also send a constant stream of information to the brain about the position of the arms, legs, neck, and torso. Even the pressure beneath the soles of the feet tells the brain that the body is being supported by a surface. On Earth, these signals usually agree with one another. When the eyes see the floor below, the inner ear also senses gravity pulling in that direction. When the body begins to lean, the leg muscles tighten immediately. The pressure beneath the feet shifts, and the brain corrects posture before a person even realizes that balance is being lost. The ability to stand upright, which we consider completely natural, is actually the result of continuous calculation. Beginning with the first steps of childhood, the brain spends years building a precise map of where the body is positioned in a world shaped by gravity. That map works so quietly that we rarely notice it exists. When the spacecraft enters microgravity, the agreement between the senses begins to break down. The eyes can still see the walls, ceiling, floor, and equipment mounted in clearly defined directions, but the inner ear can no longer detect a stable downward orientation. Structures that once relied on gravity are now left to register only the small movements of the head and body. If an astronaut turns their head a little too quickly, the inner ear may send a signal that the eyes do not confirm. If the eyes suggest that the body is still while the entire body continues to drift, the brain may mistakenly interpret the room itself as moving. A gentle rotation can sometimes make the whole cabin seem as though it is tumbling. Some people can see that they are perfectly still while feeling as though their body is leaning to one side. When they close their eyes and visual landmarks disappear, they may no longer know which way they are turning. They may even feel upside down while floating motionless in the center of the cabin. The strange part is that space offers no absolute direction that can confirm which sensation is correct. The ceiling and floor still exist in the spacecraft's design, but to the body, they gradually become little more than names. This conflict between sensory signals is what leads to space adaptation syndrome. The condition is usually most noticeable during the first 2 or 3 days. Some people experience only a heavy feeling in the head, mild difficulty concentrating, or a vague discomfort in the stomach. Others may become dizzy, develop headaches, feel exhausted, or grow so nauseated that they must temporarily stop part of their work. What is striking is that these reactions still occur in astronauts who are exceptionally healthy, have passed rigorous selection, and have trained in many complex motion environments. They have sat inside centrifuges and experienced flights that create short periods of weightlessness. Training on Earth, however, lasts only briefly. A parabolic flight may provide a few dozen seconds of weightlessness before the body is returned to its familiar sense of down. On the journey to Mars, that return never comes. Weightlessness continues from 1 hour to the next, and then from one day to another. The brain cannot simply wait for everything to go back to normal. It must change the way it interprets space and learn to function in an environment that never appeared naturally during the course of human evolution. During the first few hours, many familiar reflexes continue even though they are no longer useful. An astronaut may instinctively search for the floor to place their feet on, even though the feet no longer require a supporting surface. When trying to turn around, they may use too much force and drift much farther than intended. Even a simple motion, such as reaching out to open a storage compartment, can push the body backward. When an astronaut pulls an object closer, the person and the object may move away from each other in opposite directions. The laws of physics have not changed, but intuition shaped by a lifetime under gravity can no longer predict the outcome correctly. Inside the cabin, even a very small force is enough to keep the body moving until it reaches another surface. There is no ground to help the motion slow naturally, so travelers must learn to push with just enough force, choose in advance where they will hold on, and prepare a way to stop. Movement gradually becomes a sequence of calculations that no one ever needed to perform on Earth. Only after some time do astronauts begin to sense how much force is needed to reach the correct position without striking equipment or drifting past their destination. The discomfort of the first few days is not merely a private experience, because this is also when the crew must complete many important tasks. After launch, the spacecraft must be placed into cruise mode, its systems must be checked, and supplies must be secured in their proper locations. The crew must monitor pressure, temperature, electrical power, air quality, and the operation of the life support system. An alarm may sound at the exact moment the responsible astronaut is dizzy or nauseated. A tool that has not been stored correctly may drift into a ventilation opening. A check that would be simple on the ground may take much longer because the astronaut must hold their body in place while resisting the feeling that the entire room is turning. Under ordinary conditions, a small mistake may cause only inconvenience. Inside a sealed vehicle traveling farther and farther from Earth, many small errors can build upon one another and threaten the safety of the entire crew. The ability to adapt to microgravity therefore determines more than whether someone feels comfortable. It directly affects their ability to operate the spacecraft. To reduce the risk, astronauts usually move more slowly and deliberately during the early stage. They avoid sudden head movements, find a handhold before performing any task that requires precision, and secure their bodies so they do not accidentally push themselves away. Over time, the brain begins to change the way it prioritizes information. When the inner ear can no longer provide a reliable sense of down, vision becomes more important. The straight lines of the cabin, the positions of screens and handrails, and the arrangement of the lighting become new points of reference. Sensations from the muscles and joints are also used more heavily to determine the position of the arms and legs. The brain cannot repair the inner ear, nor can it create new gravity. It simply learns to rely more strongly on the information that remains useful. After several days, most astronauts begin to feel more comfortable. The nausea subsides, turning the head no longer makes the entire cabin seem to sway, and moving through the spacecraft gradually becomes natural. They learn where to push to drift toward the desired position and how much force to use when they need to stop. As adaptation progresses, the ideas of ceiling and floor begin to lose their meaning to the body. One person may work with their head pointing toward what someone else calls the ceiling, while a crewmate beside them is oriented in a completely different direction. Both still feel that their posture is perfectly normal because no force remains to determine who is right side up. The interior of the spacecraft becomes a place that can be used in every direction. Surfaces that would be considered walls on Earth can become locations for equipment or places to work. The brain has begun to speak a new language of motion, one that does not require a downward direction. Yet this adaptation does not completely erase the old map. It only changes, for a time, the way the brain uses information. When astronauts return to an environment with gravity, the inner ear once again senses a clear downward direction. But the brain has grown accustomed to placing less trust in that signal. Ground that once felt entirely familiar may make them dizzy, create the sensation that the room is moving, or make it difficult to walk in a straight line. Simply turning the head or bending down can be enough to disturb their balance. The brain must relearn what was once instinctive, revealing that the ability to remain upright is not a fixed function, but a state maintained through the constant coordination of many senses. A one-way journey to Mars may last between 6 and 9 months. This is not a few minutes of floating, but thousands of hours spent in an environment that has never existed naturally anywhere in the evolutionary history of our species. After some time, astronauts can eat, sleep, work, and perform complex tasks while their bodies float freely. The dizziness of the first few days gradually fades into the past, and a condition that once made every movement feel unfamiliar begins to feel normal. But feeling normal does not mean the body has stopped changing. The brain has only answered the question of how the body is oriented in a space with no true up or down. While the nervous system is rebuilding that internal map, blood and other fluids inside the body have already begun leaving their familiar positions. No longer pulled toward the legs as they are on Earth, they are quietly shifting upward into the chest, neck, and head. After several days in microgravity, the initial dizziness may have begun to fade, but the body continues to change in ways that are difficult to notice. An astronaut looks into a small mirror inside the cabin and sees that their face appears rounder than before. The cheeks look fuller, the area around the eyes is slightly swollen, and the nose feels congested, much like it does during a cold. Meanwhile, the legs appear thinner, even though the astronaut has not lost significant weight, and the muscles have not yet had enough time to visibly waste away. This change is not caused by the body gaining fat in the face or immediately losing muscle in the legs. What is happening is simpler, yet far stranger. Blood and the fluids between the tissues have begun to leave their familiar positions. On Earth, gravity constantly pulls some of the body's fluid toward the lower half. When that pull nearly disappears, fluid that once remained in the legs and lower abdomen gradually shifts upward into the upper abdomen, chest, neck, and head. Estimates from space medicine suggest that about 1 to 2 liters of blood and tissue fluid may move away from the lower body when a person enters microgravity. That is roughly the volume of 1 or 2 large bottles of water, but it does not gather in a single place. Instead, it spreads through blood vessels, tissue spaces, and many organs, enough to alter the appearance of the face and send the circulatory system signals unlike anything it received before. People rarely think about the fact that the circulatory system must resist gravity every second. When we stand, a significant amount of blood naturally tends to collect in the legs. The heart must pump strongly enough to return that blood upward. The blood vessels in the legs must constrict, and small valves inside the veins must prevent it from flowing backward. Even when the body is standing still, this entire system is working quietly to ensure that the brain continues to receive enough oxygen. When someone stands up too quickly after lying down for a long time, their vision may briefly darken or their head may feel light. That is the moment when gravity pulls blood toward the legs faster than the circulatory system can adjust. The heart must change its rhythm, the blood vessels must constrict, and blood pressure must be stabilized within only a few seconds. On Earth, the body has performed this reflex countless times, so most of us barely notice it. In microgravity, the circulatory system no longer has to perform that familiar task. Blood in the legs is no longer pulled strongly downward, allowing it to move more easily toward the upper body. Within a short time, the chest and neck receive more fluid, the veins in the neck become fuller, and the soft tissues around the face begin to retain additional fluid. As a result, an astronaut's face often appears slightly puffy. The area around the eyes looks fuller, the eyelids may swell a little, and familiar facial features begin to look different. The lining inside the nose is affected as well, creating a congested sensation similar to a cold or an allergic reaction. The traveler can still breathe normally, but the heaviness in the head and blocked feeling in the nose make the first few days even more uncomfortable. Lower down, the legs lose some of their volume. The muscles have not truly atrophied within only a few hours. The legs simply contain less blood and tissue fluid than they did before. The combination of a fuller face and thinner legs is sometimes jokingly described as a puffy face and bird legs. The body still has nearly the same mass, but the fluids within it have been distributed in an entirely different way. This change affects more than appearance. Inside the chest, sensors near the heart and major blood vessels begin to detect that this region contains more blood than usual. On Earth, such a condition often occurs when the body is carrying too much fluid. The nervous system and hormones therefore send a message that makes perfect sense according to their previous experience. The body must have more water than it needs. The problem is that the body does not know the blood has merely changed location. It cannot see that the legs are holding less fluid, nor can it understand that the disappearance of gravity is the cause. The sensors near the heart receive only one message: the chest is too full. Based on that information, the body begins trying to reduce the amount of fluid in circulation. The sensation of thirst may decrease, while the kidneys begin excreting more salt and water. Astronauts urinate more frequently during the early stage, and the volume of plasma, the liquid portion of the blood, gradually declines. The water does not disappear from the spacecraft, nor does all of it leave the body, but some is removed from the circulatory system because the body believes the previous blood volume is no longer necessary. Data from spaceflight and simulation experiments suggest that plasma volume may decrease by about 8 to 15%, depending on the duration of the flight and the response of each individual. That number may not sound especially large, but the circulatory system must maintain a continuous flow of blood to the brain within a very narrow pressure range. Losing roughly 1/10 of the plasma volume may cause little difficulty while the body is floating, but it becomes important the moment gravity returns. In microgravity, reducing blood volume is actually useful. The heart no longer has to pump a large amount of fluid against the downward pull toward the legs, so the circulatory system can function at a lower level. The body is conserving energy and adjusting itself to the new environment. It is not malfunctioning. It is solving a problem according to signals that had always been reliable throughout life on Earth. The paradox is that an adaptation that helps inside the spacecraft may become a disadvantage when gravity returns. During the many months of travel to Mars, the body gradually grows accustomed to a lower plasma volume and no longer regularly uses the reflexes that help maintain blood pressure while standing. Everything may appear stable while the astronaut is floating, but that stability depends on blood not being pulled strongly toward the legs. When the spacecraft lands, Martian gravity will return almost immediately. Gravity there is only about 38% as strong as Earth's, but for a body that has spent months in microgravity, it will still be a major change. Blood will begin moving toward the lower body, while the circulating fluid volume is already reduced, and the blood vessels may not constrict quickly enough. The brain sits at the highest point of the body and requires a continuous blood supply to function. If blood collects in the legs faster than the heart and blood vessels can compensate, the amount of oxygen reaching the brain may fall within seconds. The astronaut's vision may begin to darken. Sounds may seem more distant. The head may feel strangely light, and balance may become difficult to maintain. In more severe cases, the astronaut may be unable to remain standing or may lose consciousness. What is striking is that not everyone with reduced plasma volume responds in the same way. NASA has found that many crew members are in a state of reduced blood volume when they land, yet only some of them develop clear dizziness or an inability to remain standing for long. This suggests that the outcome depends not only on how much blood remains, but also on the heart, the ability of the blood vessels to constrict, the nervous system, and how quickly the body can reactivate reflexes that were used far less often in space. On Earth, astronauts returning from space receive immediate assistance after landing. Medical teams, chairs, transportation, and people ready to support them are all waiting if they lose their balance. On Mars, that kind of help will not exist. The people who have just completed the same journey will have to assist one another while every member of the crew is facing a similar physical transition. This makes standing up after landing far more complicated than it usually appears in films. The travelers cannot simply open a door and walk outside. They must put on their spacesuits, check the pressure, carry equipment, and be prepared to handle any problems that arise during the first few minutes. If the circulatory system has not yet adapted, even standing still may become a challenge. Before landing, astronauts may be instructed to drink additional water and salt-containing fluids to increase the volume of liquid in circulation. The idea is fairly simple. If gravity is about to pull blood toward the legs, more fluid should be returned to the circulatory system before that happens. However, drinking additional liquid cannot immediately restore all the cardiovascular reflexes that have changed over many months. Another approach involves using compression rings or bands around the thighs to retain more blood in the lower body. NASA is also studying devices that create negative pressure around the legs and hips, working somewhat like a large chamber that gently pulls on the lower half of the body. The suction is not strong enough to cause pain, but it is sufficient to draw blood away from the head and chest and toward the legs, recreating part of what the circulatory system normally experiences when a person stands on Earth. The device may look simple, but its purpose is far more profound. An astronaut places the lower half of the body inside a sealed chamber, and the pressure within it is then reduced slightly. Blood begins moving toward the legs. The vessels in the lower body must hold more fluid, and the reflexes that regulate blood pressure are called back into action. For a brief period, the body is reminded of what it feels like to live in a world with a downward direction. If such a system were carried aboard a Mars spacecraft, it could become part of the daily health routine, much like exercise. Yet every piece of equipment must compete with food, water, spare parts, and living space. A solution that benefits circulation but is too large, too heavy, or too time-consuming may be difficult to include on an interplanetary vehicle. Fluid shifts also create more complicated changes in the blood vessels of the neck. Blood from the brain normally returns to the heart through large veins, including the internal jugular vein. On Earth, gravity, posture, and pressure within the chest all help create the familiar pattern of flow. In microgravity, those conditions change, sometimes causing the blood to move more slowly or preventing it from flowing steadily in a single direction. The troubling part is that an astronaut may feel no sign of this change at all. There may be no obvious pain, no difficulty breathing, and no unusual sensation in the neck. The traveler may continue working, talking, and living normally, while blood inside a major vessel is moving far more slowly than it would on Earth. One study that followed 11 crew members during long-duration stays aboard the International Space Station found that 6 had stagnant or reversed blood flow in the internal jugular vein around the 50th day of flight. One crew member developed a blood clot that blocked the vein, while another was suspected of having a partial clot when the data were reviewed again. The finding was unexpected because every participant was healthy and showed no clear outward signs. The study also found that the internal jugular vein expanded significantly in space compared with its size when the same person was seated on Earth. Pressure inside the vessel increased. While in some individuals the blood did not move steadily toward the heart but traveled back and forth, like water trapped inside a section of pipe. Ultrasound images showed that the blood was still moving, yet making almost no clear progress in the direction it needed to go. These results do not mean that every astronaut will develop a blood clot. The study followed only a small group, and individual responses varied greatly. Still, it revealed that the circulatory system can change in microgravity in ways that space medicine had not previously considered in full, especially during missions lasting hundreds of days. One can imagine a crew member placing a small ultrasound probe against a companion's neck. Inside the quiet spacecraft, the person being examined still feels healthy and may not understand why such careful observation is necessary. On the screen, the vein appears as a dark space, while colored signals within it reveal blood moving only weakly or reversing direction with each breath. There is no doctor standing beside them to hold the probe directly. The crew member performing the examination may have received only basic medical training, while a specialist on Earth watches the images through a communication link. Near Earth, a doctor can provide guidance almost immediately. On the way to Mars, every question and response may take tens of minutes, forcing the crew to capture clear images on their own and recognize when the result is abnormal. A small ultrasound device may therefore become far more important than its appearance suggests. It can be used not only to examine the heart, abdomen, or muscles, but also to detect changes that cause no pain and leave no visible signs on the skin. Inside a spacecraft with no large imaging room and no medical specialist, the ability to look inside the body without surgery becomes an extraordinary advantage. When blood flows too slowly, the risk of a clot may increase. In the case discovered aboard the International Space Station, doctors on the ground had to develop a remote treatment plan using the medication already available on the station. Near Earth, sending additional medicine remained possible on a later resupply mission. On the journey to Mars, that option would not exist. The decision to use anticoagulant medication is not simple either. These drugs reduce the chance that a clot will grow, but they also make the body more likely to bleed after an injury. In an environment filled with exercise equipment, hard edges, and repair work, every medical benefit must be weighed against a new risk. Interestingly, the device that gently draws blood toward the lower body was also tested in research on the jugular vein. It improved blood flow during many of the examinations, suggesting that pulling blood back toward the legs may reduce some of the stagnation in the neck. Even so, the effect was not the same for everyone, and was not sufficient to make the device a complete solution. Other experiments on Earth use beds tilted with the head lower than the feet to simulate part of the fluid shift. Participants must remain in this position for days or even weeks. Blood and tissue fluid gradually move toward the upper body, allowing scientists to study the eyes, heart, kidneys, and blood vessels without sending every participant into orbit. Even so, lying head down on a bed is not entirely the same as living in space. The participant's body still presses against the mattress. The muscles and joints continue to receive pressure, and all bodily fluids remain within Earth's gravitational field. Each model can reproduce only part of the phenomenon, leaving many questions that can be answered only when people truly live in microgravity for long periods. The changes in blood reveal how the body constantly tries to adapt using rules built on Earth. When the chest becomes filled with blood, the body concludes that it contains too much water. When the heart no longer has to work against gravity, the circulatory system removes some of the volume it considers unnecessary. Every response is logical, yet the environment of the journey changes again before the body has fully stabilized. After many months in microgravity, astronauts must enter Martian gravity. After living on the surface, they return to weightlessness during the journey home. Finally, the full gravity of Earth appears once again. The body is repeatedly asked to redistribute blood and regulate pressure in a new way before the previous adaptation has been completed. A fuller face and thinner legs are easy to see, but the loss of plasma and the slowing of blood inside the veins of the neck occur silently. A person may look healthy and continue working and speaking normally, while the circulatory system within them develops patterns of flow that never occurred during life on the ground. Microgravity, therefore, does not simply cause blood to move toward the head for a few hours and then stop. It begins a chain of reactions extending through the heart, blood vessels, kidneys, and nervous system. Fluids change position. The body removes some of its water. Blood volume decreases, and the reflexes that maintain blood pressure are used less often. Each step makes it easier for the traveler to live inside the spacecraft, yet makes the eventual return to gravity more difficult. As the crew gradually becomes accustomed to slightly swollen faces and congested noses, some of that fluid continues to create changes in more sensitive places. Behind each eyeball lie extremely thin layers of tissue, tiny blood vessels, and the optic nerve connecting directly to the brain. Even a subtle change in the balance of fluid and pressure can cause those structures to deform. The fluid shift therefore changes more than the appearance of the face or the way blood circulates. After many weeks and months, it may cause an astronaut who once saw perfectly clearly to begin holding a screen farther away in order to read. The next problem of the journey does not appear on the skin or in the legs. It is quietly taking shape behind the eyes. The change begins with something very small. An astronaut is reading instructions on a screen when they notice that the lines of text no longer look as sharp as before. They blink several times, adjust the brightness, and move the screen farther away. The characters become clear again, but only at a new distance they had never needed before the flight. At first, it may seem like nothing more than fatigue after many hours of work. Dry air, artificial lighting, and an irregular schedule can all make the eyes uncomfortable. The astronaut cleans their glasses, closes their eyes for a while, and then returns to work, but the same problem appears again the next day. The issue is not the screen, the lighting, or a layer of dust on the lenses. It is developing behind the eyeball. A real case that drew NASA's attention more deeply to this phenomenon occurred during a 6-month mission aboard the International Space Station in 2009. Two astronauts, Michael Barrett and Robert Thirsk, both physicians, noticed that they were beginning to have difficulty reading research procedures at close range. Stronger reading glasses allowed them to continue working, but their medical experience kept them from dismissing the change as a normal effect of aging. After the mission, examinations showed that the problem involved more than the focusing ability of the lens. Some of the structures at the back of the eye had changed. Similar findings later appeared in many astronauts who spent long periods in orbit, leading NASA to recognize the condition as an important risk for future missions to the Moon and Mars. The eye is often compared to a camera, but that comparison can make us imagine the eyeball as a rigid object with a fixed shape. In reality, the eye is a living structure made of layers of soft tissue, blood vessels, fluid, and extremely delicate nerve fibers. Its shape is maintained by a precise balance between internal pressure, the surrounding tissues, and the fluids circulating behind it. Light passes through the cornea and lens before focusing on the retina at the back of the eye. For an image to remain clear, the distance between the front and back of the eyeball must stay within a very precise range. If the back of the eye shifts by even a tiny amount, the point where light comes into focus can move away from the retina, much like a projector placed at the wrong distance from a screen. When the back of the eyeball becomes flatter, the length of the eye may decrease slightly. Light then tends to focus at a different point, making it harder for the traveler to see nearby objects clearly. They may still be able to look through a window, recognize a crewmate's face, and move normally through the cabin, but small text, electrical connectors, or medication labels may begin to blur. NASA refers to this group of changes as spaceflight-associated neuroocular syndrome, commonly abbreviated as SANS. Its signs may include swelling where the optic nerve enters the eye, flattening of the back of the eyeball, folds developing in the layers of tissue behind it, and changes in refraction. About 70% of astronauts who complete long-duration missions aboard the International Space Station have been found to develop some degree of swelling at the back of the eye, although not everyone notices a clear change in vision. This does not mean that 70% of astronauts lose their sight or become unable to continue working. In many people, the changes are very slight and appear only when specialized instruments are used. An astronaut may still be able to read, complete their duties, and feel no pain, even as the tissues at the back of the eye become thicker or the shape of the eyeball begins to change. This is precisely what makes SANS so difficult to detect. An eye injury usually causes pain, redness, or tearing, but changes in microgravity can progress without producing any obvious warning. Nothing strikes the face, no particle scratches the cornea, and there is no single moment when the traveler realizes that the shape of the eye has begun to change. The area where the optic nerve enters the retina is commonly called the optic disc. This is where millions of tiny nerve fibers gather to carry visual signals back to the brain. If this region swells, the surrounding layers of tissue may be pushed forward. However, the degree of swelling and its effect on vision do not always correspond, because every pair of eyes responds differently. Another sign is the appearance of folds in the layer of blood vessels behind the retina. This thin tissue can be imagined as a sheet of fabric stretched across a curved surface. When the shape of the eyeball changes or pressure from behind increases, the fabric no longer lies completely flat and begins to form small creases. These folds can be extremely difficult to detect through an ordinary eye examination. They become more visible only when the retina is imaged with high-resolution equipment. The person being examined may have no idea that anything has changed, yet images taken before and after the mission reveal that the internal structure of the eye is no longer the same as it was when they left Earth. What particularly concerns scientists is the amount of time involved. SANS does not usually become obvious during flights lasting only a few days. NASA has reported that optic disc swelling was not observed in the same way during space shuttle missions lasting about 2 weeks, but it has appeared in people who spend many months in orbit This suggests that the eyes must be exposed to microgravity for some time before certain changes become clearly visible. Even so, the process does not necessarily wait until the end of a mission. Studies have recorded flattening at the back of the eyeball in some astronauts as early as around the 10th day aboard the International Space Station. The traveler may not yet notice a problem, but the eyes have already begun responding to the new environment. The most widely discussed explanation begins with the phenomenon described in the previous chapter. When gravity disappears, blood and other fluids are no longer pulled toward the legs, but shift upward into the chest, neck, and head. The space behind the eyes is not an isolated cavity. It lies close to blood vessels, the brain, and the fluid surrounding the central nervous system. Cerebrospinal fluid is a clear liquid that surrounds the brain and spinal cord, helping protect nervous tissue from impacts and changes in pressure. Some of this fluid is also present around the optic nerve. When fluids in the body shift toward the head, the balance between pressure inside the eye, around the optic nerve, and within the skull may change. At first, this condition was thought to result mainly from increased pressure inside the skull. However, evidence gathered over many years has shown that the answer is not so simple. SANS does not entirely resemble diseases caused by elevated intracranial pressure on Earth, and not every astronaut with changes in the eyes experiences the symptoms that usually accompany that condition. The name of the syndrome has also changed as scientific understanding has evolved. It was once described with a term that emphasized visual impairment and intracranial pressure. When researchers realized that several mechanisms might be involved at the same time, NASA adopted the name SANS to avoid claiming a single cause while the evidence remained incomplete. One possibility is that blood drains more slowly from the veins in the head and neck back toward the heart, causing the vessels behind the eyes to become more congested. The layer of blood vessels beneath the retina may expand, helping push the surrounding structures forward. This would be consistent with observations showing that blood flow in the neck veins of some astronauts slows down or reverses direction in microgravity. Cerebrospinal fluid may exert additional force from behind the optic nerve, while pressure inside the eyeball continues to push outward from the front. The eyes are caught between two regions of pressure that are no longer distributed as they are on Earth. A very small imbalance sustained over many weeks may be enough to gradually reshape soft tissue. The concentration of carbon dioxide inside the cabin is also being considered as a possible contributing factor. A space station is a sealed environment where air must be circulated by fans and continuously pass through purification systems. In microgravity, the warm air exhaled by the body does not naturally rise as it does on Earth, so carbon dioxide can temporarily collect around the head if ventilation is not strong enough. Higher levels of carbon dioxide can cause blood vessels to widen and may contribute to headaches. NASA is still investigating whether long-term exposure to carbon dioxide concentrations above those found in outdoor air on Earth is connected to SANS. For now, this remains only one part of the story, not a confirmed explanation. Nutrition, B vitamin levels, inflammation, genetic traits, and each person's anatomy are also being studied. Some astronauts spend many months in space and develop only very mild changes, while others show clearer signs despite living in the same environment. This difference suggests that every body may respond in its own way. Even the two eyes of the same person do not necessarily change in the same way. One eye may swell more than the other, or visible folds may appear in only one. If the cause were simply a uniform increase in pressure throughout the head, both eyes would be expected to respond more similarly. This asymmetry therefore remains one of the questions without a complete answer. In everyday life on Earth, a slight decline in near vision is usually only an inconvenience. A person can turn on a brighter light, enlarge the text, or get a new pair of glasses aboard a spacecraft traveling to Mars. The same small change may affect tasks in which even a few millimeters of error can matter. Astronauts must read numbers on control panels, distinguish between nearly identical cable connectors, and confirm whether a valve is fully closed. They must locate tiny cracks, prepare the correct dose of medication, insert needles to draw blood, and interpret ultrasound images. During repairs, their hands may be restricted by gloves, while their bodies have no ground beneath them to provide stability. If near vision becomes even slightly blurred, every task must be performed more slowly. The astronaut may need to enlarge a display, increase the lighting, or ask another crew member to check the work again. This would not bring the mission to an immediate stop, but it would increase the time required, add to fatigue, and raise the chance of mistakes in an environment that already leaves very little room for error. A minor visual change becomes even more dangerous during an emergency. If smoke begins spreading through the cabin, the travelers must quickly read warnings, find the correct masks, and identify which electrical line needs to be disconnected. If a crewmate loses consciousness, they must clearly see medication labels, monitoring displays, and the proper position for a probe without being able to wait for a new pair of glasses to arrive. For this reason, astronauts often carry glasses with several different prescription strengths, even if they did not need them before launch. These glasses are not simply for reading books or using a computer. They are part of the mission's backup equipment. In the case of Michael Barrett and Robert Thirsk, stronger glasses allowed them to continue reading procedures aboard the station, but they did not address the cause of the change in vision. Monitoring the eyes in space has therefore become a regular task. Astronauts may use a specialized camera to photograph the retina, recording images of the optic disc and the blood vessels at the back of the eye. These photographs are compared with pre-flight data to identify subtle changes the traveler may not yet be able to feel. Another important instrument is optical coherence tomography, commonly known as OCT. This device uses light to create images of extremely thin layers of the retina, much as ultrasound uses sound to look inside the body. It can measure the thickness of tissue around the optic nerve and detect folds too small to be seen with an ordinary examination. The International Space Station carries an OCT system that crew members use for regular checkups. The astronaut looks into the device, holds the head in the correct position, and allows a beam of light to scan across the retina for a few seconds. The resulting images are detailed enough for specialists on the ground to track changes through each stage of the mission. Crew members may also measure pressure inside the eye, photograph the retina, or use ultrasound to examine the area behind the eyeball. These tasks may sound simple when an eye specialist is standing nearby, but aboard the station, the person operating the equipment is usually an astronaut without specialized training in ophthalmology. They must keep their body from drifting, position the instrument at the correct angle, and prevent the image from becoming blurred by movement. At present, specialists on Earth can observe the examination almost in real time and guide each step. They can ask the astronaut to turn the probe to the left, adjust the focus, or repeat a scan. With this kind of remote support, crew members who have never trained as ophthalmic technicians can still capture images useful enough to assess their health. On the way to Mars, that method will no longer work in the familiar way. When a signal takes many minutes to reach Earth, astronauts cannot wait for a specialist to guide every movement of their hands. If an image is captured at the wrong angle, they may not receive that feedback until tens of minutes later, long after the examination has ended. Future equipment will therefore need to be smaller, easier to use, and capable of assessing image quality on its own. Software could indicate when a probe is misaligned, automatically center the area that needs to be scanned, or compare new results with earlier data. NASA experiments have shown that people without extensive training can still obtain a substantial number of OCT images of diagnostic quality when they are guided by an appropriate procedure. That level of independence will be essential if a crew member begins to experience blurred vision halfway through the journey. The crew must determine whether the problem is simply temporary eye strain, a refractive change that can be corrected with glasses, or a sign that the optic nerve is being affected. No one would want to make a serious medical decision based only on how the patient feels. Scientists are also testing several ways to prevent fluid from remaining concentrated near the head for too long. One area of research involves devices that create negative pressure around the lower body, helping draw blood back toward the legs. Such a system could be combined with exercise to support the eyes, heart, muscles, and bones, at the same time inside a spacecraft with limited room. Other possible measures involve nutrition, carbon dioxide control, exercise timing, or artificial gravity. However, no method has yet been shown to prevent SANS completely in every astronaut. Because the cause remains uncertain, finding a solution is like trying to repair a machine before knowing exactly which part started the failure. Fortunately, NASA has not recorded any astronaut permanently losing their sight, because of sands. Many changes gradually lessen after returning to Earth, when gravity pulls fluids back toward the lower body. Even so, the fact that no one has gone blind from the syndrome does not mean that every effect disappears quickly. One study that followed a small group of astronauts found that the back of the eyeball remained flattened and refractive changes were still present in 3 individuals for at least 7 years after their missions. The sample was too small to represent all astronauts, but it suggests that some structures may not fully return to their original shape even after years of living under Earth's gravity. This raises a larger question for a journey to Mars. Most of the data available today come from missions lasting about 6 months and occasionally close to a year aboard the International Space Station. The station remains relatively close to Earth. The crew is monitored regularly, and they can return within a shorter period if a serious problem develops. A Mars mission could last several years when the outbound journey, time on the surface, and return flight are all included. The body would not only remain in microgravity longer, but would also face stronger radiation and have no access to replacement equipment or direct medical assistance. No one knows whether the changes in the eyes will eventually stabilize or continue to grow over time. It is also unclear whether Martian gravity, which is about 38% as strong as Earth's, will be enough to pull fluids downward and help the eyes recover. It may reduce some of the pressure toward the head, but there is no human data showing how great that relief would be. The first travelers to set foot on Mars will also become the first people to provide a real answer to that question. The eyes, therefore, become a quiet clock of the journey. They record the movement of fluids, the time spent in microgravity, and the way the body responds to an environment it has never experienced for so long. The changes may be subtle enough that the traveler notices only when a screen must be held a few centimeters farther away, yet behind that small adjustment lies an entire system under strain. An astronaut may look through the window and still see Mars growing larger ahead. They can still recognize the light and dark regions across its surface and watch the planet draw closer with each passing week. Yet even as they look toward that new world, the shape of their own eyes is slowly changing without causing any pain. While fluid shifting toward the head alters the tissues around the eyes, the lower body undergoes the opposite condition. The legs no longer contain as much blood as before, nor do they need to support weight or keep the body upright. The forces that once helped the bones and muscles preserve their strength have nearly disappeared. The body begins receiving a new message. These load-bearing structures are no longer being used as much as they were on Earth. Rather than continuing to spend energy maintaining them, the body will slowly begin removing the parts it believes are no longer necessary. Inside the spacecraft, an astronaut needs only to place a fingertip against the metal wall and push gently. The entire body immediately drifts toward the opposite side, with no need for the legs to take a step, the knees to bend, or the back muscles to hold the torso upright. A movement that requires many muscle groups to work together on Earth can now be accomplished with a force so small that it is almost negligible. During the first few days, this lightness can feel liberating. Heavy objects no longer pull the arms downward. The body is no longer pressed against the floor by its own weight, and moving between compartments feels almost like gliding through water. Yet beneath that pleasant sensation, the bones and muscles are receiving a very different message. Structures that once worked continuously are now barely being used. On Earth, the body never truly gets a break from gravity. Even while standing still, the leg muscles must stabilize the knees, the back muscles support the torso, the neck muscles hold up the head, and the bones of the hips carry much of the weight above them. Every step creates a small force that travels from the feet through the lower legs, knees, and hips, and then upward into the spine. These forces do more than allow us to move. They also tell the body that the skeleton must remain strong. Every time we stand, climb a staircase, or carry a bag, the bones receive another reminder that they are still supporting a body with weight. When those reminders disappear, the body does not continue maintaining everything at the same level simply because those structures were once important on Earth. It adjusts its resources according to the present environment. If the legs no longer need to lift the body, the hips carry no load, and the spine is no longer compressed, preserving a heavy and durable framework begins to become biologically expensive. Bone is often imagined as a hard material, almost like a system of internal support beams. In reality, it is living tissue, filled with blood vessels, nerves, and millions of cells that are constantly at work. Even while a person sleeps, old sections of bone are being broken down as new material is built to replace them. One group of cells specializes in removing bone that is old or damaged. Another fills the empty spaces with new tissue, which is then mineralized to restore its strength. On Earth, these two processes usually remain in relative balance. The skeleton is never truly still, but the amount removed is roughly equal to the amount rebuilt. Microgravity shifts that balance to one side. Mechanical signals reaching the bones fall sharply, slowing the process of building new tissue. Bone breakdown continues because the body still needs to remove older regions, but replacement material is no longer produced at the same rate. The areas that carry weight on Earth are affected most clearly, especially the bones of the hips, thighs, lower legs, and spine. The arm bones also change, though usually to a lesser degree because astronauts still use their arms to pull, push, and stabilize their bodies. This difference shows that the skeleton is responding directly to how each part of the body is being used. During long-duration missions, mineral density in some weight-bearing bones may decline by an average of about 1 to 1.5% each month. The rate is not the same for everyone, nor is the loss distributed evenly throughout the skeleton. Some astronauts lose less because of their biology, exercise routine, or nutrition, while others change more quickly despite following the same schedule. 1% may not sound especially large when considered on its own. However, a journey to Mars may last 6 to 9 months, not including time spent on the surface or the return flight. When the decline continues month after month, the total amount of material lost from important regions can become significant. On Earth, certain changes in bone occur slowly over many years of aging. In microgravity, the pace of remodeling becomes much faster. This does not mean that astronauts immediately develop the skeleton of an elderly person, but it does show that the body is entering an entirely different mode of life within a remarkably short period. Bone density alone does not tell the whole story. Two bones may contain nearly the same amount of mineral yet differ in strength, depending on how that material is arranged inside them. The microscopic struts that form the internal support network may become thinner or lose their connections, weakening the structure even when the overall measurement has not changed dramatically. While an astronaut is still floating inside the spacecraft, this weakening produces almost no obvious sensation. There is no ground placing weight on the hips, no need to run in order to maintain balance, and rarely an impact strong enough to test the bones. A person may still move quickly and believe that their body remains completely healthy. The real challenge appears only when weight returns. At that moment, the bones must carry a load precisely when their structure has lost some material. The supporting muscles have also weakened, and balance has not yet recovered. A misplaced step on uneven ground may have far greater consequences than it would have before the mission. The breakdown of bone also releases calcium into the bloodstream. The mineral does not disappear. It simply leaves the place where it was once stored. Some is used for other functions in the body, while the rest passes through the kidneys and leaves in the urine. Higher levels of calcium in the urine make kidney stones a greater concern. Stones form when minerals crystallize, attach to one another, and gradually grow. A stone may be no larger than a grain of sand, yet as it moves through the urinary tract, it can still cause intense pain. On Earth, someone with a kidney stone can be taken to a hospital, undergo imaging, receive powerful pain medication, or have a procedure if necessary. Inside a spacecraft traveling between Earth and Mars, there is no emergency room and no large imaging machine. A crew member in too much pain to exercise will continue losing muscle and bone more quickly, while the others must take on additional work. The risk increases if astronauts do not drink enough water. Thirst may decrease as the body adapts to microgravity, and a demanding schedule can make it easy to postpone drinking. As the urine becomes more concentrated, minerals have a greater chance of crystallizing. The diet must be carefully planned to provide enough calcium for the bones without further increasing the amount excreted through the kidneys. Vitamin D is also important because the body needs it to absorb and use calcium. Inside the spacecraft, astronauts receive almost no direct sunlight, so vitamin D must come from food or supplements. Simply consuming more calcium does not automatically prevent bone loss. Without mechanical force, the body may continue dismantling the skeleton even when building materials are available. Bones need both nutrition and physical signals. Supplying the material without creating a reason to use it cannot restore conditions similar to those on Earth. Muscles respond more quickly than bones to the disappearance of weight-bearing forces. On the ground, muscle groups in the calves, thighs, buttocks, abdomen, and back remain active almost constantly. Even when a person stands still, small muscles continue contracting gently to keep the body from falling forward or leaning to one side. In microgravity, that background work nearly disappears. The legs no longer need to lift the body. The gluteal muscles no longer stabilize the hips, and the back muscles no longer resist the pull that would bend the body downward. The energy once devoted to standing posture is no longer needed, so the body begins reducing the size of muscle fibers that are used less often. The fibers gradually shrink, strength declines, and the ability to generate force quickly also weakens. Muscles that specialize in maintaining posture are especially affected because they are active throughout the day on Earth, but are almost unemployed in space. Once again, the body is conserving what the current environment no longer demands. The decline is not limited to muscle size. The way muscles use energy, the speed at which they contract, and their resistance to fatigue also change. Some fibers that are normally suited for endurance tend to shift toward a state that produces force more quickly, but tires more easily, making it harder for the traveler to sustain prolonged activity when gravity returns. Inside the spacecraft, these changes are remarkably well hidden. An astronaut needs only a gentle push to glide from one end of the cabin to the other. There is no need to use the thigh muscles to take a step, the calves to lift the body, or the abdominal muscles to maintain balance while moving. Drifting quickly does not prove that the legs are still strong. It only shows that, without body weight resisting motion, a very small force is enough to set the body's mass in motion. Travelers may even feel more agile than before while their actual ability to lift, pull, or stand is steadily declining. If someone stops walking for several weeks on Earth, their muscles and bones also weaken. Patients confined to bed for long periods often lose strength very quickly, even though they remain within Earth's gravity. Microgravity pushes this process further because, even while working and moving, the body never receives the same load it would experience while standing. Scientists use long periods of head-down bed rest to study part of this phenomenon on Earth. Participants are rarely allowed to stand, so the leg muscles become less active, the bones bear less weight, and fluids shift toward the head. The model does not reproduce spaceflight completely, but it shows that removing the act of standing for only a few weeks is enough to produce clear changes throughout the body. The spine responds in a different way. On Earth, the weight of the head and torso compresses the vertebrae together. The soft discs between them remain under pressure throughout the day, which is why a person is often slightly shorter in the evening than they were just after waking. In microgravity, that compressive force disappears. The spaces between the vertebrae widen, the spine becomes straighter, and the astronaut begins to grow taller. Some gain several centimeters in height, occasionally close to 3% of their original stature. For someone about 5 feet 9 inches tall, a large increase can exceed 2 inches. Clothing that fit properly on the ground may suddenly seem too short, while seats and body restraints may need to be adjusted. NASA must account for this change when designing spacesuits and seating for long-duration missions. Becoming taller does not mean the body is developing in a beneficial way. The bones do not grow longer. The spine is simply being released from compression. The discs between the vertebrae absorb additional fluid, the ligaments stretch, and the natural curves of the back begin to change. Many astronauts have experienced back pain or discomfort during the early phase of a mission. The pain may be dull, appear while sleeping, or become more noticeable after a twisting movement. The body is adapting to a longer spine, but the surrounding muscles and ligaments are not yet accustomed to their new positions. On Earth, the curves of the spine help distribute force while standing, walking, and running. In space, the spine tends to become straighter. When gravity returns, those curves must be established again, while the back muscles must be strong enough to keep the vertebrae stable. If the muscles have weakened and coordination has not yet recovered, the risk of back pain or injury may increase. Research involving people who completed long-duration missions has also drawn the attention of space medicine specialists to the condition of the spinal discs after flight, especially during the period when the body is readjusting to weight. Exercise becomes the most important line of defense against the decline of muscles and bones. Aboard the International Space Station, astronauts spend an average of about 2 hours each day on physical activity. This is not free time or an optional routine for those who enjoy exercise. It is a required part of the working schedule. A treadmill in space does not function like one in a gym on Earth. If an astronaut simply placed their feet on the moving belt, each step would push the body away from the machine. They must wear a harness that pulls the shoulders and hips toward the surface so the feet can apply real force to the belt. When the downward pull is strong enough, the bones of the legs and hips receive a meaningful signal. But the straps can also become uncomfortable around the shoulders or hips. If the force is too light, running does not provide enough loading. If it is too strong, the astronaut may find it difficult to continue for long and may develop pain where the harness presses against the body. A stationary bicycle helps protect the heart and maintain endurance, but it places relatively little direct load on the bones. Astronauts must secure their feet to the pedals and stabilize the upper body while cycling. Because there is no seat in the usual sense, the body may drift slightly with each rotation unless it is properly restrained. The most important device for preserving musculoskeletal strength is a resistance system designed to simulate weightlifting movements. Ordinary weights become almost weightless in microgravity and are therefore nearly useless. Instead, the equipment uses specialized mechanisms to resist the astronaut's motion. Crew members perform exercises resembling squats, heel raises, pulls, and presses with enough force for the body to experience a meaningful load. The modern system aboard the station can produce resistance equivalent to hundreds of kilograms, helping preserve the movements most essential to the hips, legs, and spine. Every workout requires time to prepare, adjust the equipment, secure the body, and record data. Afterward, the machine must be cleaned and inspected because sweat does not fall to the floor. It clings to the skin and clothing, or floats away in droplets. The total time devoted to protecting the body is therefore longer than the 2 hours of exercise listed on the schedule. The spacecraft must also manage the heat and humidity produced during physical activity. On Earth, sweat evaporates and warm air naturally rises. In microgravity, a layer of warm air may remain around the body unless fans carry it away, making the astronaut feel hotter and preventing sweat from leaving the skin as easily. Exercise also produces vibrations that travel through the spacecraft's structure. On a large space station, the equipment is designed to reduce the vibrations that might disturb sensitive experiments. A smaller vehicle traveling to Mars will have to balance the need for intense exercise against the risk of shaking delicate systems. 2 hours each day may sound manageable, but across hundreds of days, it becomes a major part of the mission. Astronauts must still maintain the spacecraft, conduct experiments, complete medical checks, prepare food, clean the cabin, and find enough time to rest. Every hour spent exercising is an hour unavailable for other work. If a machine breaks down, the crew loses not only a piece of exercise equipment but also one of its primary defenses against physical decline. Repairing it then becomes a medical necessity rather than simply restoring a convenience. The machines currently used aboard the International Space Station are large and heavy. The station was assembled through many launches and continues to receive regular supply deliveries. A Mars spacecraft must carry most of what it needs from the beginning, making it difficult to bring full-sized versions of all the equipment used today. Engineers will need to create systems that are smaller, yet still capable of producing enough resistance, durable enough to survive thousands of workouts, and simple enough to repair with a limited supply of spare parts. The equipment must accommodate different body sizes, avoid producing excessive vibration, consume little power, and operate safely inside a confined cabin. One possibility is to combine exercise with artificial gravity. If part of the spacecraft rotates, centrifugal force could pull the body outward and create a sensation of weight. Astronauts might then be able to walk, stand, or exercise under a more natural load instead of relying on harnesses. Rotating the entire spacecraft would require a large structure, complex machinery, and precise control of motion. A small centrifuge would be easier to carry, but the user would experience its force only for limited periods. If the radius were short, the head and feet would also experience different levels of force, which could easily cause dizziness. The question is not simply whether artificial gravity can be created. No one yet knows exactly how much force the body needs, or how long it must be applied each day, to protect the bones and muscles. Researchers are still trying to determine whether 1 hour at Earth gravity could compensate for an entire day of weightlessness, or whether a weaker force maintained for longer would work better. Nutrition provides important support, but it cannot replace exercise. Astronauts need enough protein to preserve muscle, enough energy to complete their workouts, and sufficient calcium and vitamin D for the bones. If food intake falls because of nausea, menu fatigue, or a demanding schedule, the protection offered by exercise also becomes less effective. Too little protein makes it harder for the body to rebuild muscle fibers damaged during training. Too little energy forces the body to use its own muscle tissue as fuel. On the other hand, simply eating more without loading the muscles and bones cannot prevent the decline caused by microgravity. Another factor is the difference between individuals. Two astronauts following the same exercise program may still lose bone at different rates. Age, sex, initial bone structure, hormones, genes, diet, and the body's response to training all contribute to a unique outcome. This means that a single exercise schedule may not be ideal for everyone. Future missions may need to monitor individual muscle groups and bone regions, then adjust training according to each crew member's data. Someone losing bone more rapidly in the hips may need greater loading through the legs, while another person experiencing back pain may need a different form of exercise. Ultrasound can help monitor muscle size during the flight, but bone is more difficult to measure. Full bone density scans are usually performed on Earth before and after a mission. During a journey to Mars, the crew will need smaller tools to determine whether their protective measures are actually working. If they wait until landing to discover that someone has lost too much bone or muscle, there may be little opportunity left to correct the problem. Early monitoring would allow the crew to adjust exercise, nutrition, and rest before the decline begins to interfere with their ability to work. Even with regular training, the body is not completely protected. Modern exercise programs have greatly reduced muscle and bone loss compared with the earliest missions, but some changes still continue. Gravity acts on the body 24 hours a day, while exercise provides loading for only a short period. After returning, bone does not recover as quickly as muscle. Muscular strength may improve over weeks or months of rehabilitation, while bone density may require years to return close to its pre-flight level. Some regions may never recover exactly the same internal structure they once had. The return of minerals does not guarantee that the internal network of bone will be rebuilt in precisely the same way. The body may restore much of the overall density while arranging the material differently, meaning the bone may not regain the same strength. For this reason, a single density measurement cannot fully describe its ability to bear weight. On Mars, gravity at about 38% of Earth's level will provide more loading than microgravity, but far less than the body experiences at home. That force may help slow the loss of muscle and bone, yet no human has lived in such an environment long enough to know whether it will be sufficient to preserve health. If Martian gravity is too weak to protect the skeleton, the crew will still need to exercise on the surface. Spacesuits, walking, and carrying equipment will create additional loading, but the amount will depend on how the mission is designed. A busy day outside the habitat may not affect the body in the same way as a day of walking on Earth. The first minutes after landing may be the most concerning. Astronauts will emerge from months of microgravity with muscles unaccustomed to carrying weight, bones that have lost some material, a circulatory system that responds more slowly, and an inner ear relearning the direction of down. Each system may be weakened only slightly, but all of them must function together in the same moment. A spacesuit is not light in terms of mass. Martian gravity reduces its weight, but its inertia remains unchanged. When the traveler turns or tries to stop, the mass of the suit continues moving in the original direction. Weak muscles and poor balance make that motion harder to control. The terrain outside will not be as smooth as a laboratory floor. Rocks, dust, small depressions, and sloping ground may cause a foot to slip or become caught. On Earth, the leg muscles react within an instant to stabilize the body. After many months in microgravity, that response may no longer be fast or strong enough. If a crew member falls, standing up again inside a bulky suit will already be difficult. If that person is injured, the others may have to drag or lift them back to the spacecraft. The crew will need enough strength not only to carry their own bodies, but also to rescue another person in a place far from any hospital. The weakness that was almost invisible inside the spacecraft suddenly becomes a matter of survival. While floating, travelers do not need to know how many pounds their legs can lift. On the surface of Mars, the ability to generate force within a few seconds may determine whether they can climb over a high step, maintain their balance, or carry a companion to safety. The body is not deliberately destroying its skeleton in an attempt to harm itself. It is following the same logic that helped living organisms survive for millions of years. Do not spend energy maintaining tissue that the environment no longer requires. Inside a weightless spacecraft, that adaptation makes sense. The problem lies at the destination. The body is becoming better suited to the journey while becoming less prepared for the moment it must stand on another planet. The material removed from the bones, the muscle fibers allowed to shrink, and the reflexes that have gone unused will all be needed again almost at once. Daily exercise slows this process, but it cannot create a complete copy of life under gravity. Every run, cycling session, or resistance workout is only a temporary reminder sent to the body that the legs and skeleton are still needed. While the bones and muscles lose mass because they no longer have to resist weight, another organ receives a similar message. The heart continues beating through every second of the journey, but its most difficult task has disappeared now that blood is no longer being pulled toward the legs. A muscle that no longer has to work as hard will adjust to its new load. The heart is no exception. After months of pumping blood in microgravity, its shape, strength, and response to gravity will begin to change. The heart continues beating from the very first second the spacecraft leaves Earth. That familiar rhythm does not stop when the astronaut begins floating through the cabin, but the work behind each beat is no longer the same. An organ that once had to push blood through an upright body is now operating in an environment with no downward direction. On the ground, the human body is much like an upright column of fluid. Blood tends to collect in the legs, while the brain, positioned higher above, still requires a constant supply of oxygen. The heart, blood vessels, and nervous system must keep that flow stable whenever we stand up, walk, bend down, or change position. If the response is delayed by only a few seconds, the world in front of us begins to darken. The heart immediately beats faster. The blood vessels in the legs constrict, and blood pressure is restored before the body can fall. This reflex occurs many times each day, quietly training the circulatory system throughout an entire lifetime. Microgravity removes most of that challenge. Astronauts still have a head, legs, and their own physical orientation, but blood is no longer pulled strongly toward the lower half of the body. The heart continues delivering oxygen to the tissues, yet it no longer has to lift blood from the legs to the brain with every beat. During the first few days, however, the opposite condition appears. Fluid shifts into the chest, causing more blood to enter the heart and its chambers to become fuller. The body interprets this as a sign that it contains too much water. The kidneys quickly remove additional salt and fluid, reducing plasma volume after the initial period of adaptation. With less blood in circulation, less returns to the heart with each beat. Pumping also becomes easier because there is no longer a vertical column of fluid being pulled downward by gravity. The heart muscle begins adjusting to this reduced workload, much as the leg muscles shrink when they no longer have to support the body's full weight. NASA has described how the heart can change from its familiar oval form into a rounder shape in microgravity. This is not simply a disease process or a sign that the organ is about to stop working. It reflects the fact that the volume of blood inside the heart, the forces pulling on its walls, and the surrounding environment are all different from those on Earth. The heart becomes smaller, but the actual process is more complicated than a simple measurement of size. The heart muscle may lose mass when its workload decreases, yet the amount of blood filling the chambers also has a strong influence on ultrasound measurements. A heart that appears smaller has not necessarily lost an equivalent amount of muscle tissue. In one study following a short-duration mission, the measured mass of the left ventricle had decreased by about 9.1% immediately after the astronauts returned. Only 3 days later, the measurement had nearly returned to its pre-flight level. This rapid recovery suggests that part of the change was related to blood filling and temporary alterations in shape, rather than meaning that almost 1/10 of the heart muscle had simply disappeared. Long-duration missions also produce different results from one person to another. Exercise routines, pre-flight fitness, and the workload placed on the heart all influence the degree of remodeling. Someone who maintains an appropriate level of physical activity may protect the heart more effectively, while long periods under reduced load increase the risk of decline. The most important issue is not whether the heart becomes a few percent smaller. The real question is whether it can increase its output quickly enough the moment gravity returns. Inside the spacecraft, the body can drift with a push from a fingertip. On the surface of a planet, every step once again requires the heart to supply blood to working muscles. The reflexes that maintain blood pressure also change over time. On Earth, they are activated whenever a person moves from lying down to sitting, or from sitting to standing. In space, rotating the body in any direction does not pull blood toward the legs, leaving this system with far fewer opportunities to operate. When a function is not used regularly, its response may become slower. Blood vessels in the lower body may no longer constrict as strongly as before. Plasma volume has already fallen, and the heart has become accustomed to a lighter workload. Everything remains stable until the moment the spacecraft touches down on a world with gravity. Blood is immediately pulled toward the legs. The heart beats faster to compensate for the fluid leaving the chest, but each beat may not send enough blood to the brain. The astronaut may feel lightheaded, their field of vision may narrow, and sounds may seem to recede into the distance, while their legs feel both weak and heavy. Historical NASA data show that this challenge is far from rare. In one group of 6 astronauts returning after approximately 6 months aboard the International Space Station, 4 were unable to complete a 10-minute upright tilt test on the day of landing. Earlier long-duration datasets recorded rates of orthostatic intolerance as high as about 83% under testing conditions. Although most astronauts recovered quickly over the following days, that number does not mean that 83% of astronauts fainted while leaving the spacecraft. The test was deliberately designed to place stress on the circulatory system and reveal its limits. Even so, the results show that many healthy, highly trained people may be unable to maintain blood pressure while standing upright immediately after a long mission. On Earth, medical teams wait outside the landing capsule. Astronauts are supported, placed in chairs, and monitored continuously. If they become dizzy, they are not expected to carry equipment or pull an injured crewmate from the vehicle. Mars will provide no such assistance. The people who have just completed the same journey will have to inspect the spacecraft, put on protective suits, and activate their habitat themselves. Gravity there is only about 38% as strong as Earth's, but no one yet knows exactly how that level will affect a circulatory system that has spent many months in microgravity. The strain on the heart does not end with reduced plasma volume. The composition of the blood is also changing in ways that cannot be seen from outside the body. There is no wound, and not a single drop of blood leaves the astronaut. Yet red blood cells are being destroyed more rapidly throughout the flight. Red blood cells carry hemoglobin, the protein that collects oxygen from the lungs and delivers it to the muscles, brain, and other organs. On Earth, the body creates and removes about 2 million red blood cells every second. That enormous turnover remains balanced because the bone marrow continually produces replacements. The marrow study, which followed 14 astronauts on missions averaging about 167 days, found that the rate of red blood cell destruction increased by approximately 54%. Instead of removing close to 2 million cells each second, the body eliminated nearly 3 million. This process did not occur only during the first few days, but continued throughout 6 months in orbit. What makes this phenomenon so intriguing is how scientists were able to measure it. They could not sit inside the spacecraft and count the millions of cells disappearing every second. Instead, the evidence was found in the astronaut's own breath. When hemoglobin breaks down, the body naturally produces an extremely small amount of carbon monoxide as a byproduct. Astronauts hold their breath briefly, then exhale air from deep within the lungs into a collection bag. The containers are returned to Earth, where highly sensitive instruments measure these minute traces of gas. This is not carbon monoxide from a fire or a malfunctioning system. It is produced inside the body when the heme ring of hemoglobin is dismantled. From a single breath, researchers can trace the destruction of blood cells that occurred earlier. Gas samples collected around the 5th day showed that signs of red blood cell breakdown had risen by more than 50% compared with pre-flight levels. Iron, ferritin, and other markers in the blood also changed in ways consistent with increased cell destruction. This finding challenged the earlier belief that space anemia was only a brief response during the first few days. The effects also continued after the mission had ended. 1 year after landing, the research team still found signs that red blood cell destruction and regeneration remained different from their pre-flight state. The body does not immediately return to its former condition the moment the feet touch the ground. The reason red blood cells are removed more rapidly is still not fully understood. Microgravity, changes in blood volume, bone marrow activity, inflammation, and the radiation environment may all contribute. The question becomes even more important when a Mars mission will last far longer than 6 months. Inside the spacecraft, a mild shortage can remain remarkably well hidden. Astronauts do not need to lift their body weight in order to move. A gentle push can carry them to the other end of the cabin, leaving the leg muscles with a much lower demand for oxygen than they would have while walking on the ground. When the spacecraft lands, all those favorable conditions disappear at once. Muscles that have grown smaller must hold the body upright, the balance system is relearning the direction of down, and the heart must increase the amount of blood it pumps each minute. If the ability to transport oxygen has declined, the body may fatigue at precisely the moment the mission demands the greatest effort. The heart rate rises more quickly, breathing becomes heavier, and the legs lose strength sooner. No single system fails completely, but each one operates below its pre-flight level. Small changes begin to accumulate, turning an ordinary movement into exhausting work. The bone marrow must produce new red blood cells to replace those being destroyed. This requires protein, iron, folate, vitamin B12, and a steady supply of energy. A prolonged shortage in any one of these elements can reduce blood production, especially when the body is also repairing muscles, bones, and other forms of damage. Simply taking large amounts of iron is not an easy solution. If the main problem is that red blood cells are being destroyed more rapidly, additional iron may do little to slow the process. Excess iron can also accumulate or take part in reactions that damage cells, so intake must be guided by testing rather than by fatigue alone. Maintaining nutrition on the journey to Mars involves more than placing enough containers of food inside the spacecraft. The food must remain stored for months or years, while its flavor, texture, and vitamin content gradually change. A meal may still be safe to eat without retaining the same nutritional value it had on the day it was packaged. NASA has determined that the food system for some Mars exploration scenarios may need a shelf life of about 5 years. Tests have shown that most vitamins remain more stable when stored at suitable temperatures, but thiamine, or vitamin B1, can degrade quickly in warmer conditions. Other vitamins present their own difficulties. NASA has found that vitamins B1 and C in both food and supplements can decline significantly during long-term storage. This means the spacecraft must not only carry nutrients, but also find ways to protect or produce them after leaving Earth. One idea now being tested resembles a miniature biological kitchen. Sealed packets containing specially designed yeast can produce essential nutrients. When needed, astronauts add water, awaken the microorganisms, and allow them to manufacture vitamins or nutritional precursors aboard the spacecraft. Bionutrients. One was a 5-year experiment aboard the International Space Station designed to determine whether these microorganisms could remain functional after prolonged storage. Instead of carrying every vitamin needed for every year of the mission, a future spacecraft might carry a system capable of producing nutrients at the moment they are required. Even if the nutrients remain intact, astronauts must still eat enough of them. Fluid shifting toward the head creates nasal congestion, making many foods taste more bland. Space adaptation syndrome reduces food intake during the first few days, while the repetition of the menu can gradually erode the appetite over hundreds of days. On Earth, smell plays a major role in the experience of eating. When the nose is congested, a meal loses much of what makes it appealing. This is one reason many people in space prefer stronger sauces, spicy flavors, or more intense seasonings than they normally choose. A reduced appetite does not cause immediate consequences after a single meal. The body continues to work, weight may not fall noticeably, and test results may remain within acceptable limits. After many weeks, however, insufficient energy makes exercise more difficult, slows muscle recovery, weakens the immune system, and deprives the bone marrow of the materials needed to produce new cells. Every skipped workout allows the heart and muscles to lose more of their load. A smaller food intake makes recovery less effective. Faster destruction of red blood cells reduces the ability to deliver oxygen. The chain of effects does not begin with a single major failure, but with many small changes that reinforce one another. Health monitoring must therefore go beyond weighing the body or measuring blood pressure. Heart rate during exercise, recovery speed, hemoglobin levels, nutritional status, and tolerance for standing must all be combined into a single picture. One measurement alone rarely explains why a traveler feels tired. The spacecraft cannot carry a large laboratory, so future instruments must be compact, durable, and able to work with very small blood samples. The crew will need to perform tests independently and receive assistance from software, because doctors on Earth will not be able to guide every movement when signals take many minutes to arrive. Cardiovascular countermeasures must also work together. Exercise helps preserve the heart muscle and endurance. Drinking additional water and salt before landing increases circulating volume, and compression garments reduce the amount of blood collecting in the legs. No single method can completely correct every change. NASA data show that a drop in blood pressure while standing does not depend only on fluid loss. Many astronauts experience similar reductions in plasma volume, yet only some become unable to remain upright. The difference lies in how the heart, blood vessels, and nervous system respond when blood begins leaving the chest. The same flight does not produce the same body. One astronaut may preserve endurance relatively well, while another experiences much stronger dizziness after landing. Heart structure, fitness, sex, hormones, genes, and the response to exercise all help determine the outcome. The goal of space medicine is not to keep every measurement exactly as it was before launch. The body will inevitably adapt when the environment changes so profoundly. The more important task is to prevent that adaptation from going too far, so the heart and bloodstream can still return to a gravity-based mode when necessary. In microgravity, a rounder heart, lower plasma volume, and a slight reduction in red blood cells may still support everyday life. The body is building a circulatory system suited to a place where it does not need to stand, run, or lift its own weight. Mars will demand the opposite. The moment the spacecraft opens, blood will be pulled downward, the muscles will need more oxygen, and the heart must increase its output. Adaptations that once helped the body conserve energy during the journey suddenly become challenges at the destination. No single organ creates the problem. The heart, blood vessels, red blood cells, muscles, and nutrition form an interdependent system. When several of these components decline even slightly, the ability to stand and work can change noticeably. These changes still belong to familiar structures that people can name. Deeper within every cell, the journey is leaving traces that are much harder to see. The genetic code itself remains almost unchanged, but the way genes are switched on, switched off, and used begins responding to the new environment. The body is not rewriting all of its DNA. It is reading the same set of instructions differently, selecting some passages for greater use while temporarily reducing the activity of others. The next change does not appear in the shape of an organ, but in the way trillions of cells begin to understand their own roles. From the outside, the traveler is still the same person who entered the spacecraft many months earlier. The same face, the same eye color, and the same fingerprints remain unchanged. When astronauts look into a mirror, they do not see a new person slowly emerging. The deepest changes of spaceflight do not always leave visible marks on the skin or alter the shape of the body. Inside trillions of cells, The underlying DNA remains the same genetic code that existed before launch. Space does not erase that information and rewrite the traveler into someone else. Most of what changes lies in how cells use the code, choosing which sections need to become more active and which can temporarily become less so. DNA contains an enormous amount of information, but no cell uses all of it at once. Muscle cells require different instructions from nerve cells. Liver cells read sections involved in metabolism, while immune cells prioritize those that help detect and respond to pathogens. The genome is like a vast library contained within every cell. Every book remains on the shelves, but only certain volumes are opened at any given moment. Food, light, sleep, hormones, stress, physical activity, and the surrounding environment all help determine which pages are read more often. Microgravity introduces a set of conditions never encountered in ordinary life. Muscles no longer bear weight, fluids shift toward the head, sleep rhythms become disrupted, radiation exposure increases, and the body must remain inside a sealed cabin for many months. Cells respond by changing the amount of protein produced from many different genes. Some genes involved in repairing damage become more active. Pathways related to immunity, inflammation, energy metabolism, and the response to stress also begin to change. Functions used less often in microgravity may become less active, much as the body reduces muscle mass when the legs no longer have to support its weight. This is known as a change in gene expression. The DNA sequence remains almost entirely the same, but the level of activity in different parts of the genome no longer matches its pre-flight state. The difference is like a musical score that still contains every note, while the conductor changes which instruments play loudly and which fade into the background. This regulation also occurs through epigenetic mechanisms. Small chemical markers can attach to DNA or to the proteins that hold it, making certain regions easier to read or more difficult to access. They do not change the letters of the genetic code, but they influence how cells use that code. These mechanisms operate every day on Earth. A night without sleep, a prolonged period of stress, or a change in diet can all shift gene activity. Spaceflight is different because many factors appear at once, continue for long periods, and exist within an environment the body cannot leave. A rare opportunity to observe this process appeared in 2015, when astronaut Scott Kelly began a 340-day mission aboard the International Space Station. His identical twin brother, Mark Kelly, remained on Earth. Because the brothers shared nearly the same genetic foundation, they offered scientists a comparison that is extremely difficult to find in human research. Throughout the mission, research teams collected blood, urine, saliva, stool samples, and a wide range of physiological data from both brothers. They monitored gene activity, immunity, metabolism, the microbiome, telomeres, cognitive performance, and many other measures. In total, 10 research teams involving dozens of scientists combined their findings into an unprecedented biological portrait of 1 year spent beyond Earth. Scott was not a perfect copy of Mark even before the mission began. They shared the same genetic starting point, but they had lived different lives, followed different diets, and experienced different environments. Mark had also been an astronaut, although during the study period he remained under Earth's gravity. Because the study involved only one pair of twins, its findings cannot be treated as a rule that applies to every space traveler. Its greatest value came from the ability to examine one body in extraordinary detail before, during, and after spaceflight, then compare it with someone whose genetic background was as similar as possible. The results showed that the activity of thousands of genes in Scott's body changed while he was in orbit. Pathways connected to immunity, DNA repair, responses to low oxygen, metabolism, and cellular stress all showed shifts. The genome itself was not replaced. It was the way the genome was being used that responded strongly to the flight. After Scott returned, most levels of gene expression gradually moved back toward their pre-flight state. NASA reported that about 91.3% of the monitored gene activity levels had returned to baseline within 6 months. A smaller group had not yet fully stabilized, particularly those involved in immunity and responses to damage. This does not mean that 8.7% of Scott's DNA had been permanently altered. Gene expression naturally fluctuates with health, sleep, diet, and the timing of sample collection. The finding only indicates that some cellular activity remained different from its pre-flight level for months after he came home. Epigenetic changes were also observed, but the overall degree of change in Scott was not clearly greater than the changes that appeared in Mark during the same period on Earth. This detail is a reminder that the human body never remains completely still, even without leaving the planet. Aging, work, and everyday life continue to leave biological traces. Another reassuring result came from the influenza vaccine. Scott received the vaccine while aboard the station, and his body produced an immune response similar to the one seen after vaccination on Earth. Microgravity did not cause the immune system to completely lose its ability to recognize and learn how to respond to a new target. However, a normal response to a vaccine does not mean that the entire immune system continues working exactly as before. Immunity involves many types of cells, chemical signals, and control mechanisms. Some parts may become more active, while others grow less precise, leaving the body in a state of imbalance rather than simply becoming stronger or weaker. Immune cells must respond to psychological stress, sleep deprivation, radiation, disrupted circadian rhythms, and microgravity all at once. Stress hormone levels fluctuate, communication between cells changes, and inflammation may increase at certain times. The strangest sign of this imbalance does not necessarily come from a new pathogen entering the spacecraft. It may come from viruses that have lived inside the body for many years, hidden deep within cells and producing almost no symptoms at all. After the initial infection, many viruses in the herpes family are never completely eliminated. The virus that causes chickenpox and shingles can remain hidden inside nerve cells. Epstein-Barr virus, cytomegalovirus, and herpes simplex can also persist in a dormant state, kept under tight control by the immune system. When the body is healthy, these viruses remain almost entirely inactive. They do not disappear, but neither do they continuously cause disease. The immune system acts like a watchful guard, keeping these traces of the body's biological past asleep. Prolonged stress can weaken that control. The viruses begin copying some of their genetic material, causing their DNA to reappear in saliva or urine. Astronauts may have no fever, pain, or rash, so the change is discovered only when biological samples are tested. A review of spaceflight data found that 47 of 89 Space Shuttle astronauts and 14 of 23 crew members aboard the International Space Station shed the DNA of at least one type of herpesvirus in biological samples. Most cases produced no obvious symptoms, although a small number of astronauts developed skin lesions or related signs. These figures do not mean that every detected virus was causing illness or was capable of infecting another person. Tests sometimes identify only genetic material and do not confirm that living viruses are highly active. Even so, the finding is significant because it shows that the immune system changed enough for these dormant guests to begin sending out signals. In this sense, the crew does not leave Earth entirely alone. Each person carries a history of viral infections from many years earlier, even when the memory of the illness has long faded. The journey reaches into biological traces that may have seemed locked away since childhood. If a virus reactivates without causing symptoms, the traveler may still complete their work normally. The risk rises when sleep deprivation, poor nutrition, stress, or another illness appears at the same time. During a long journey, many small pressures may converge during the same period. Regular physical activity appears to be associated with better viral control during long-duration missions. Exercise does more than protect the heart, muscles, and bones. It also helps regulate immunity and stress hormones. A workout inside the cabin therefore affects far more systems than the traveler can see. Beyond viruses, every body carries an even larger community. Bacteria, fungi, and other microorganisms live in the intestines, on the skin, inside the mouth, and throughout the respiratory tract. Most are not enemies. Many help with digestion, produce useful metabolites, train the immune system, or compete against microorganisms that could cause harm. Each person's microbiome carries a unique signature shaped by food, living environments, previous medications, and the people they regularly encounter. It is not a fixed list. Its composition changes with every meal, every period of stress, and every stage of health. aboard a spacecraft traveling to Mars. All these familiar influences become far more limited. Most food is processed and packaged in advance. Water passes continuously through recycling systems. Air circulates through the same enclosed space, while contact with soil, plants, animals, and natural environments almost completely disappears. The microbiome must adapt to a repetitive menu, a new daily schedule, and changes within the immune system itself. During the twin study, Scott's gut microbial community shifted while he was in orbit, then moved closer to its pre-flight state after he returned. NASA concluded that the change in diversity was not greater than the fluctuations commonly associated with stress on Earth. That finding is somewhat reassuring, but it does not eliminate questions about a journey lasting several years. Scott continued receiving food supplies, was closely monitored, and lived aboard a station from which returning to Earth remained relatively quick. A Mars spacecraft will be separated from fresh food, medication, and replacement equipment for a much longer period. Microorganisms from the human body do not remain confined to it. Every breath, conversation, touch, shower, or workout releases some of them into the environment. Inside a closed system, these organisms appear on handrails, dining surfaces, equipment, air filters, and frequently used areas. NASA has found that the microbial communities on station surfaces carry a strong signature from the crew's skin. When crew members change, the microorganisms in the surrounding environment change as well. The spacecraft gradually develops a biological fingerprint of the people living inside it. This is not necessarily a sign of danger. Most microorganisms traveling with humans are familiar species that have lived alongside the body for a long time. A completely sterile cabin would also be unrealistic, because every crew member continually releases skin cells, moisture, and millions of microorganisms into the air. The real task is to keep that community stable. Ventilation systems must limit places where moisture can remain for long periods. Surfaces must be easy to clean, filters must be replaced at the proper time, and recycled water must be monitored to prevent certain species from growing beyond control. Without gravity to pull water droplets toward the floor, moisture can easily remain in small spaces behind equipment. A hidden area may retain water longer than expected, creating a place where bacteria or fungi can grow. The danger is not limited to human health. Some microorganisms can also damage materials or form biofilms inside water systems. Aboard the International Space Station, astronauts regularly use swabs to collect samples from surfaces, the air, and their own bodies. These samples are cultured or sequenced to identify which species are present, how their numbers are changing, and whether they carry any characteristics that require closer attention. Near Earth, most samples can be returned to large laboratories for analysis. A spacecraft traveling to Mars cannot wait for months to learn what may be growing inside its water system. The crew will need compact sequencing machines, automated procedures, and software capable of recognizing unusual patterns while still aboard the spacecraft. DNA sequencing technology has already been used in orbit, proving that travelers can read genetic material beyond Earth. The future goal is not simply to identify an unfamiliar bacterium, but to monitor the entire biological community before a change develops into a medical or technical problem. The crew carries more than the ecosystem within the intestines. The spacecraft itself gradually becomes an ecosystem, where humans, microorganisms, air, water, and surfaces continuously exchange material. No part exists entirely apart from the rest. Each time antibiotics are used, the community of bacteria in the gut may change. A diet low in fiber affects the species that depend on plant-based foods. Sleep deprivation disrupts hormones, and those hormones in turn influence immunity and the microbiome. In the opposite direction, substances produced by gut bacteria can affect inflammation, metabolism, mood, and the body's ability to use nutrients. A change that begins with a meal may sometimes spread into several systems that the traveler would not immediately connect with food. Telomeres are another part of the story that is often misunderstood. They sit at both ends of chromosomes, protecting genetic information from damage as cells copy themselves. The most familiar comparison is the protective cap at the end of a shoelace, which keeps the fibers beneath it from unraveling. In many cells, telomeres tend to grow shorter with each division. Aging, illness, and cellular stress are all connected to changes in telomere length. But telomeres are not a simple clock that reveals whether someone is young or old. Researchers expected Scott's telomeres to shorten in space because of radiation and stress. Instead, the results moved in an unexpected direction. The average telomere length in his white blood cells increased while he was in orbit. This became one of the most intriguing findings of the twin study. That lengthening did not mean Scott became younger in space. Longer telomeres do not necessarily indicate healthier cells, nor do they guarantee a longer life. Regular exercise, weight loss, a carefully controlled diet, and changes in the population of blood cells may all have contributed to the result. When Scott returned, most of his telomeres quickly moved back toward their pre-flight lengths, with many changes occurring during the first few days. At the same time, the number of extremely short telomeres increased in some cells. 6 months later, the average length had nearly returned to normal, but the distribution between long and short telomeres was not exactly the same as before. This detail matters more than the simple question of whether telomeres are long or short. A group of extremely short telomeres can make it difficult for cells to continue dividing, while some abnormal cells use mechanisms that extend telomeres and allow them to survive longer. Health depends on balance, not on the assumption that longer is always better. The twin study also found signs of chromosomal instability and changes in DNA repair pathways. These findings did not mean that Scott's body had been transformed into a new genome. They showed that his cells had been forced to manage greater stress throughout a year spent outside their familiar environment. Ionizing radiation can break or alter DNA. Cells possess several repair systems that usually correct most damage before it causes lasting consequences. If two broken sections are rejoined incorrectly, or if the damage exceeds the cell's ability to recover, the cell may stop dividing, destroy itself, or retain a permanent change. Sleep deprivation makes immune regulation less stable. Diet affects the microbiome and the materials available for cellular repair. Stress changes hormone levels, while microgravity shifts gene activity in the muscles, bones, blood vessels, and many other tissues. None of these factors acts alone. Radiation exposure occurs while the traveler is sleep deprived. The immune system responds inside a body eating a different diet. The microbiome changes within a sealed environment where everyone shares the same air and surfaces. This is why studying individual genes is not enough to understand spaceflight. Scientists must combine gene expression, proteins, metabolites, hormones, microorganisms, and physiological data into a single picture. A signal becomes meaningful only when its relationship to other changes is understood. The amount of data generated by a single astronaut can be enormous. Every blood sample contains information about thousands of genes, many types of immune cells, and countless small molecules. Following them across hundreds of days creates a biological map that is always moving, rather than a fixed result captured at one moment. On a journey to Mars, this monitoring capability must be made small enough to fit inside the spacecraft. The crew cannot carry dozens of laboratories. Instruments must use very little blood, operate automatically, deliver results quickly enough, and help identify changes before the traveler develops symptoms. Future medicine may not use the same response for every crew member. Someone showing increased inflammation may need adjustments to sleep or workload. A crew member with an imbalanced microbiome may need a change in diet, while someone experiencing viral reactivation may require closer immune monitoring. The twin study showed that the body possesses a remarkable ability to recover. Most gene expression, microbiome conditions, and many other measurements returned close to baseline after Scott came back to Earth. A year in space did not transform him into a person with entirely different DNA. Even so, recovery after 1 year in low Earth orbit cannot fully answer the questions posed by Mars. The International Space Station remains within Earth's magnetosphere for most of its orbit, where radiation levels are lower than in interplanetary space. Scott also returned to medical teams, fresh food, and a complete rehabilitation program. A Mars mission could last close to 3 years, when the outward journey, surface stay, and return flight are all included. The crew would spend much longer in deep space radiation, without regular resupply and without the ability to return quickly if biological measurements began moving in a troubling direction. No one knows whether gene expression would reach a new stable state after the first year or continue to change. There is also no complete answer for how the microbiome would respond as fresh food became increasingly scarce. Dormant viruses that remained quiet during a 6-month mission might behave differently when the journey lasts for years. The human body is not a machine made of separate parts, working in isolation. It is a network of cells, microorganisms, chemical signals, and genetic information that constantly influence one another. Every small change has the potential to spread through pathways that are difficult to see. The traveler still carries the same name, the same memories, and the same genome they have had since birth. What is changing is the way the body interprets that set of instructions in an entirely new environment. Some pages are opened more often, others are temporarily closed, while protective systems are forced to work in rhythms they were never trained to follow on Earth. Cells can repair an astonishing amount of damage. They reconnect broken DNA, remove damaged proteins, and replace cells that no longer function properly. Because of these mechanisms, humans can continue living, working, and adapting through many months in orbit. But beyond the protection of Earth's magnetic field, damage comes from more than stress or lack of sleep. High-energy particles from the sun and deep space can pass through the spacecraft walls, clothing, skin, and tissue before entering individual cells without making a sound. Travelers cannot see them, nor can they feel the moment their DNA is struck. This invisible rain continues throughout the journey, forcing the cell's repair systems to confront a challenge that was absent during most of human evolutionary history. Outside the spacecraft window, there are no clouds, no wind, and no raindrops striking the glass. The blackness of space appears almost motionless. The stars remain fixed in place for minutes at a time, and the silence makes the surrounding emptiness seem completely vacant. Relying only on sight and hearing, a traveler might believe that nothing is touching the spacecraft at all. The reality is very different. Every second, particles carrying immense amounts of energy race through space at tremendous speeds. Some strike the outer hull, deposit their energy in the material, and come to a stop. Others continue deeper, passing through equipment, cabin air, clothing, skin, and the cells inside the human body. No sound is produced when a particle passes through the spacecraft wall. Astronauts feel no tiny impact against their skin. The flight continues normally. The displays show no warning, and the crew goes on working while radiation detectors quietly record an environment unlike anything found on Earth's surface. At home, life is protected by two immense shields. The atmosphere absorbs or weakens many forms of radiation before they can reach the ground. Earth's magnetic field deflects some charged particles, creating a vast protective region around the planet. Human beings spend their entire lives beneath these two barriers, so we rarely appreciate their value. The sky does more than hold the air we breathe. The magnetic field does more than create auroras near the poles. Together, they prevent a significant portion of the space radiation environment from reaching the body directly. The International Space Station orbits hundreds of kilometers above the ground, yet it still remains within a region partially protected by Earth's magnetic field. Crew members aboard the station receive more radiation than people on the surface, but their environment is not identical to interplanetary space. A spacecraft bound for Mars must leave this protective region behind for most of the journey. As Earth's magnetic field recedes into the distance, two main sources of radiation begin to determine the crew's exposure. Both consist of high-energy particles, but their origins, patterns of arrival, and possible forms of protection are very different. Understanding that distinction is essential, allowing the crew to know when normal operations can continue and when everyone must seek shelter. The first source is galactic cosmic radiation, commonly abbreviated as GCR. These particles come from beyond the solar system, accelerated by violent processes within the galaxy before traveling through space for extremely long periods. Most are protons, followed by helium nuclei, while a small fraction consists of heavy atomic nuclei carrying exceptionally high energies. Heavy nuclei make up only a small percentage of the total, but researchers pay close attention to them because they can leave dense trails of ionization along their paths. When a particle carrying a large electric charge passes through a cell, it may affect many molecules within a narrow region, producing a type of damage different from X-rays, or the more familiar forms of radiation used in hospitals. GCR does not usually arrive as a sudden burst and then disappear. It creates a nearly continuous background of radiation in deep space. Its intensity changes with solar activity, but the crew cannot simply wait a few hours for the particles to pass before continuing the journey. They remain present day after day, month after month. There is an intriguing paradox within the solar cycle. When the sun is more active, its magnetic field and solar wind expand more strongly, reducing some of the galactic cosmic radiation entering the inner solar system. When the sun becomes quieter, GCR levels tend to rise. A period with fewer solar storms is therefore not necessarily the period with the mildest overall radiation environment. The second source comes directly from the sunday. Large eruptions can release protons, electrons, and other ions into space. When a solar particle event is directed toward the spacecraft, radiation intensity may rise sharply over a much shorter period than the constant background of GCR. If galactic cosmic radiation resembles a light rain that never quite ends, a solar particle event is more like a sudden thunderstorm. Most of the time, the environment may remain within expected limits. After an eruption on the sun, however, warning systems may force the crew to change their plans before the stream of energetic particles arrives. The two sources also create different shielding challenges. Many protons from solar particle events have lower energies than galactic cosmic rays, so a suitable layer of material can significantly reduce the dose received by the crew. GCR contains particles capable of penetrating much more deeply, making complete protection through passive shielding far more difficult. The human body has no specialized sense for detecting ionizing radiation. We feel heat when touching a hot object, hear the sound of an impact, and notice a cut through nerve endings in the skin. A cosmic particle, however, may pass through tissue without causing any immediate pain. Along its path, a high-energy particle interacts with atoms in the body, knocking electrons out of place. This ionization can break molecules apart, create highly reactive products, or damage DNA directly. Cells repair most minor injuries, but not every repair is completed perfectly. This does not mean that every particle passing through the body will inevitably cause disease. Some travel through less critical regions, while others leave damage that is repaired accurately. Risk emerges from accumulated probability. The number of exposures, the type and energy of each particle, the location affected, the duration of the mission, and the repair capacity of each individual body. Travelers cannot know which particle has just passed through a skin cell or which one crossed the nucleus of a cell deep inside the body. These events are far too small to feel individually. Only instruments can record the surrounding radiation, while its biological effects must be evaluated over long periods. Even so, radiation occasionally creates an experience that astronauts can perceive directly. During the Apollo missions, many crew members reported seeing flashes, points, or streaks of light, even when their eyes were closed and the spacecraft cabin was completely dark. Imagine lying inside a small sleeping compartment on the return journey from the moon. The lights are off, your eyelids are closed, and no outside light can enter. In the middle of that darkness, a thin white streak suddenly crosses your field of vision and disappears before you have time to react. No lamp has just switched on. No display is flickering. This visual sensation has been linked to high-energy particles passing through the eye or interacting with the retina, the optic nerve, and other parts of the system that creates vision. The crews of Apollo 15, 16, and 17 conducted dedicated observation sessions to study this phenomenon. During one session lasting about 60 minutes on Apollo 17, the observer reported seeing 17 flashes of light. Accompanying instruments were designed to search for a connection between these sensations and cosmic particles passing through the region of the head and eyes. These flashes should not be interpreted as evidence that every occurrence causes serious damage. Their significance lies elsewhere. For one brief moment, travelers become directly aware that the space which seems so empty is passing through both the spacecraft and their own bodies. Since Apollo, astronauts in orbit have continued to describe spots, lines, or clouds of light appearing in their vision when their eyes are closed. The phenomenon does not occur all the time, and its intensity varies from one person to another. Most radiation remains completely invisible, producing no clear sensation at all. The long-term effects of radiation are not limited to the risk of cancer. NASA research programs also examine its possible impact on the lenses of the eyes, the cardiovascular system, the central nervous system, and many other tissues. Radiation may also interact with microgravity, sleep deprivation, inflammation, and the biological stresses described in earlier chapters. Cataracts are a relatively recognizable example because the eyes contain transparent structures that must remain clear over long periods. Accumulated damage may gradually cloud the lens, scattering light before it reaches the retina. The consequences may not appear until many years after the mission. The heart and blood vessels also contain layers of cells that are vulnerable to long-term damage. The nervous system raises even more difficult questions, because some heavy particles can create concentrated tracts of ionization through tissue. Scientists are investigating whether exposure during a long mission could affect memory, decision-making, or reaction speed. Human data from beyond Earth's magnetic field remain limited. The Apollo missions lasted only a short time, while most experience with long-duration spaceflight comes from low Earth orbit. Many risk estimates for a journey to Mars must therefore combine measurements from space with cellular experiments, animal studies, and computer models. One important set of data was collected during the flight that carried the Curiosity rover to Mars. The RAD instrument inside the spacecraft measured the radiation environment over a period resembling an interplanetary transit, giving scientists real observations rather than predictions alone. Using these measurements, NASA once developed a reference scenario in which total exposure during a round trip and time on the Martian surface could reach approximately 1 sievert. The outbound journey, the surface stay, and the return flight each contributed a significant portion of the total dose. This was an estimate for one particular mission design, not a fixed number for every future voyage. The sievert is a unit intended to reflect not only the amount of radiation energy absorbed, but also the biological effects of different types of radiation. A heavy particle that produces a dense trail of ionization is not evaluated in exactly the same way as an equal amount of energy delivered by a less damaging form of radiation. A dose approaching 1 sievert does not mean that an astronaut will certainly become ill or immediately develop acute radiation sickness. A dose accumulated slowly over many months presents a different problem from the same amount received within a very short period. The risk must be understood as a long-term probability rather than a predetermined outcome. Spacecraft design, material thickness, trajectory, travel speed, and the timing within the solar cycle can all change the result. A mission that shortens the journey reduces the number of days exposed to the constant GCR background. Yet a major solar event occurring at the wrong moment could rapidly increase the dose if the crew cannot reach shelter in time. Differences between individual bodies are also not fully understood. Age, biological sex, health, genetics, and previous radiation exposure may all influence the ability to repair damage. Two people seated beside each other in the same cabin may not receive exactly the same dose in every organ or face the same long-term risk. The most obvious solution might seem to be wrapping the spacecraft in as much metal as possible. If a thin shield reduces radiation, it appears reasonable to simply make it thicker. In reality, this approach quickly encounters two major limits: the mass that must be launched from Earth and the way high-energy particles interact with matter. Every additional kilogram requires more launch energy, increasing fuel demands or reducing the amount of food, water, and equipment that can be carried. A shield thick enough to stop many deeply penetrating particles could weigh far more than an interplanetary spacecraft can realistically support. Thick materials do not always simply stop the particles. When a high-energy GCR nucleus strikes an atom in metal, both may fragment and produce secondary particles. Behind the shielding, there may then be not only the original particle, but also neutrons and nuclear fragments continuing into the cabin. This does not mean metal always makes radiation more dangerous, or that the spacecraft hull offers no protection. It shows that shielding is more complicated than building the thickest possible wall. The type of material, its thickness, and the arrangement of multiple layers all affect the final radiation field inside the spacecraft. Hydrogen-rich materials receive particular attention because hydrogen nuclei are extremely light. When high-energy particles interact with them, the slowing and fragmentation processes tend to produce a more favorable field of secondary particles than many heavier materials. Polyethylene, water, and several composite materials are being studied for this purpose. Water is especially attractive because the spacecraft must carry or recycle it anyway. If water tanks are positioned carefully around living areas, the same mass can support life while also helping reduce radiation exposure. Food, processed waste, and other hydrogen-rich supplies may also become part of the protective barrier. On a mission far from Earth, a container of water is not merely a source of drinking water. It is also a reserve supply, part of the thermal control system, and a building block in the radiation shield. Its location aboard the spacecraft may be almost as important as the amount of water it contains. That arrangement must also change over time. Clean water is consumed and passed through the recycling system, while food supplies are gradually used. If materials that once formed part of the shielding disappear from one side of the cabin, protection in that area changes as well. The design must return recycled water or other materials to the correct positions, so the barrier does not slowly become thinner during the journey. It may not be necessary to protect every centimeter of the spacecraft equally. For solar particle events, the vehicle could include a small compartment serving as a storm shelter. Surrounded by water, food, and equipment, this area would provide thicker shielding than the rest of the spacecraft without making the entire vehicle excessively heavy. During ordinary life, the compartment might serve as storage or a sleeping area. When solar monitoring instruments detect a significant eruption, its purpose changes immediately. The crew stops working, gathers communication equipment, drinking water, and medical supplies, then moves into the smallest and best protected space available. The door closes, but those inside hear no storm. There is no sound of particles striking the hull like hailstones and no flash outside the window. Only the numbers on the radiation monitors begin to rise, revealing that the environment beyond the shelter has changed, while every human sense still perceives complete silence. The amount of time spent inside the shelter depends on how the event develops and how much shielding is available. The crew may have to postpone exercise, repairs, and non-essential experiments. If another system malfunctions at the same time, they may face a difficult choice between remaining safely inside and leaving the shelter to protect the spacecraft. Early warnings provide more preparation time, but they are not always perfect. Observatories near the sun may detect an eruption, while forecasting models estimate the direction and speed of the particles. The interplanetary environment remains complex, and the actual intensity at the spacecraft's location cannot always be known accurately in advance. A storm shelter is most effective against many types of solar particle events, but it cannot completely solve the problem of the GCR background that continues throughout the journey. The crew cannot remain crowded inside a small compartment for months. Long-term protection will still require a combination of shielding materials, spacecraft layout, shorter travel times, dose monitoring, and biomedical research. Each crew member may wear a personal dosimeter to track accumulated radiation exposure. Sensors placed throughout the spacecraft can create a map showing which areas receive better shielding. Sleeping, working, and exercise spaces can then be arranged according to that map rather than convenience alone. Even the spacecraft's orientation may matter during a specific event. If the thicker sections containing engines, fuel, or supplies are positioned between the sun and the storm shelter, the vehicle's own structure can provide additional protection. What may seem like a simple flight control decision then becomes a medical measure. Activities outside the spacecraft must be considered even more carefully. A spacesuit provides limited protection, but it cannot be made as thick as the walls of the vehicle. During a sharp increase in radiation, someone working outside does not have enough surrounding material to reduce exposure as effectively as those inside the shelter. Repair and exploration schedules must therefore be coordinated with space weather forecasts. Weather in this context has nothing to do with rain or wind. It describes solar activity, the solar wind, the interplanetary magnetic field, and streams of particles that may pass through the spacecraft's location. When the journey ends and the crew reaches Mars, the danger does not disappear. The red planet lacks a strong global magnetic field like Earth's. Its surface atmosphere is also only a small fraction as dense as the one at home, so its ability to shield against radiation is far more limited. The RAD instrument aboard Curiosity measured a continuous background of radiation on the Martian surface, much of it produced by galactic cosmic rays during the early observation period. The thin atmosphere still offers some protection, as shown by variations between day and night, but it cannot create a shield comparable to Earth's atmosphere. The location of a base must therefore be chosen not only according to light, temperature, water, or terrain. Elevation also affects how much atmosphere lies overhead. Lower regions have a slightly thicker layer of air above them, although this advantage is not enough to replace artificial shielding. Martian soil and rock may become the most important locally available protective material. Instead of launching every layer of shielding from Earth, robots or crew members could cover habitats with regolith. A sufficiently thick layer of soil would reduce many particles before they reached the living areas. Habitats might also be placed partly underground or beside natural formations that provide additional mass for protection. The shielding walls would then not be made entirely from materials brought from home. The planet itself would become part of the system, keeping the crew alive. Regolith is not a perfect material and can still produce secondary radiation when struck by high-energy particles. Its thickness, composition, and arrangement in multiple layers must be calculated carefully. Even so, using local material avoids the need to launch hundreds of tons of shielding out of Earth's gravity. Inside the habitat, water and food could still be arranged around sleeping areas or a storm shelter. People spend many hours in one fixed place while resting, so increasing protection around the sleeping quarters could reduce accumulated exposure without requiring the entire structure to have the same thickness. Sensors outside the base must continuously monitor solar conditions. If a stream of high-energy particles is approaching, outdoor activities must be canceled, and anyone using a rover must return or find shelter. Exploration range will be limited not only by batteries, oxygen, and fuel, but also by the time required to reach protection. Radiation also affects electronics. A particle passing through a microchip can change the state of a data bit, causing a temporary error or gradually damaging a component. Flight computers, communication systems, and memory units must be able to detect faults, correct corrupted data, and rely on redundant backups. This creates a direct connection between human health and spacecraft reliability. The computer tracking radiation exposure is itself being struck by the same particles it measures. A solar storm warning system must continue operating in an environment capable of causing errors within its own components. No single type of shielding can solve every problem. Metal provides structural strength and protection from impacts. Hydrogen-rich materials help reduce radiation. Water, food, stored supplies, and Martian soil add further protective mass. Solar forecasting helps the crew avoid the most dangerous periods. A shorter flight is also a form of protection. Every day removed from the journey is one less day during which the body accumulates the continuous GCR background of interplanetary space. Engines and trajectories therefore determine more than when the spacecraft arrives. They directly influence the long-term health of everyone inside. Medicine may help by monitoring cellular damage, inflammation, and each person's ability to recover. Biological protectants and drugs intended to reduce certain effects are being studied, but no pill can make the human body immune to radiation. Cells already possess many systems for repairing DNA. Most of the time, these systems work well enough that the body never notices each small injury. During prolonged exposure, the task of medicine is to keep those repair processes from becoming overwhelmed while detecting early changes that may begin to accumulate. Radiation risk always carries uncertainty. One person may complete the mission without any obvious problem. Other effects may not appear until years later, when determining how much came from the flight becomes far more difficult. This makes radiation very different from a mechanical failure. When a valve leaks, the crew can see the pressure dropping and search for the place that needs repair. With radiation, the spacecraft may continue operating perfectly, while biological risk quietly accumulates little by little. A traveler lies inside the darkened cabin, closes their eyes, and waits for sleep. A thin streak of light flashes again and disappears. It causes no pain and gives no clue about which part of the body the particle has just passed through. For that brief moment, the space beyond the hull no longer feels completely empty. The metal walls, layers of water, and the human body are simply regions of matter through which the invisible rain is trying to pass. Most of the time, cells repair what has been affected, and life continues as usual. The crew can measure that rain, estimate the total dose, and build better layers of protection. They cannot switch off its source, nor can they carry Earth's magnetic field with them. Protecting human life, therefore, becomes an art of reducing, distributing, and avoiding exposure rather than eliminating the danger entirely. The hull can block part of the radiation, but another form of pressure does not need to pass through metal. It develops inside the cabin itself, growing from the repetition of nearly identical days, longer communication delays, and the knowledge that there is no longer a quick path home. Outside the window, Earth will gradually shrink from an immense world into a point of light barely distinguishable among the stars. Within that silence, the next challenge does not pass through cells like a high-energy particle. It enters sleep, memory, and the way human beings live together inside a space they cannot leave. An astronaut sits in front of the communications screen, trying to describe an unusual sound that has just appeared in the cooling system. They attach instrument readings, thermal images, and a short audio recording, then press the transmit button. The message leaves the spacecraft at the speed of light, faster than any vehicle humanity has ever built. Even at that speed, the signal still needs time to cross the distance between two planets. Earth and Mars are constantly moving along different orbits, sometimes relatively close together and sometimes separated on opposite sides of the Sunday. Depending on their positions, a message may take only a few minutes to arrive, or more than 20. There is nothing the crew can do to shorten that delay. The signal is not slow because the computer is weak, the antenna is damaged, or the communications network is overloaded. This is a limit imposed by physics. Even light needs time to cross tens or hundreds of millions of kilometers of space. If the one-way delay is 24 minutes, a question takes that long just to reach Earth. The fastest possible response requires another 24 minutes to return. Even under the best conditions, the traveler must wait nearly 48 minutes to receive the first answer. 48 minutes is not especially long when the question concerns the following day's schedule. But if a pipe is growing hotter, a crew member has just lost consciousness, or the air quality is declining, nearly an hour becomes something entirely different. A malfunction does not stop and wait for specialists on the ground to read a message. Aboard the International Space Station, communications delay is extremely small. Astronauts can speak with mission control almost in real time and receive instructions while they are still performing a task. If a camera is positioned incorrectly, a doctor or engineer can ask them to adjust it immediately. A spacecraft traveling to Mars will no longer have that second-by-second support. The crew must complete a step, record the result, transmit the data, and continue assessing the situation using their own knowledge. By the time a response arrives, the real conditions may have changed long before. A conversation between two planets therefore no longer resembles a telephone call. It becomes more like a series of letters sent rapidly across space, in which the writer must anticipate what the recipient will want to ask. Every message must be clear enough to reduce the need for additional exchanges that could add tens of minutes. Instead of simply reporting that a system has a problem, astronauts must describe where the sound is coming from, when it began, how the temperature is changing, and which checks have already been completed. Images, graphs, and sensor data must be included in the same information package so the team on Earth can provide a useful answer the first time. This form of communication requires a different way of thinking. Travelers cannot speak half a sentence and wait for the other person to ask a follow-up question. They must organize the situation themselves, separate facts from assumptions, and clearly state what decision needs to be made. The ability to write a precise message becomes an operational skill rather than merely a habit of communication. The delay also changes conversations with family. Someone tells a funny story but does not hear laughter immediately afterward. The reply arrives only after the original emotional moment has passed. Both sides remain connected, yet they no longer live within the same rhythm of time. A traveler sends a voice recording in the morning according to mission time. Their family receives it while preparing for bed. The response returns many minutes later, sometimes after the astronaut has already moved on to another task. Communication gradually becomes a sequence of stored messages rather than a conversation in which people can interrupt, laugh together, or share the same silence in the same second. Distance does not make affection disappear, but it changes how human presence is felt. A loved one's voice still comes through the speaker, and their face still appears on the screen, while the body understands that this person is living on a world that cannot be reached for many months. Even a sentence such as, "Everything here is still fine," carries a different meaning. The sender knows the message will arrive late. The listener understands that by the time those words are heard, conditions aboard the spacecraft have already moved into a later moment. Reassurance always belongs to the past, whether a few minutes or several dozen minutes ago. Beyond the ordinary delay, the journey must also face a period when communication becomes far more difficult. When Mars and Earth lie on opposite sides of the Sun, the signal path passes through the hot plasma surrounding the star. This alignment is commonly known as solar conjunction. The plasma can interfere with radio signals, causing data to become distorted or lost. Mission controllers for robotic spacecraft on Mars usually limit the transmission of new commands during this period. Instead of directing the vehicle day by day, they upload simple tasks in advance and allow it to operate in a safe mode. The restricted period lasts far longer than a few minutes. Depending on the mission and the level of caution, communications may be reduced for several days and sometimes nearly 2 weeks. A robot may remain still, take a few images, or carry out only activities that have already been carefully tested. A human crew cannot pause life in the same way. Air must still be filtered, water must still be recycled, food must be prepared, and equipment must be checked regularly. If a system fails, the people aboard must respond even when Earth cannot provide reliable instructions. Before conjunction begins, Mission Control will transmit large collections of documents, emergency scenarios, and response procedures. Medical supplies will be inventoried, software updated, and critical equipment examined carefully. The crew will prepare much like a small community about to enter a period of isolation caused by a very long storm. No manual can predict everything. A valve may fail in a way never seen during testing. A crew member may develop symptoms that do not perfectly match any medical situation described in the records. Decisions must then be made using the available data, personal experience, and the shared judgment of everyone aboard. The sense of isolation therefore comes from more than Earth being far away. It also arises from knowing that help still exists but cannot arrive in time. Specialists on the ground have knowledge, medicine, and laboratories, yet all of them remain on the far side of a distance that no technology can cross instantly. The crew still lives together, so they are not alone in the sense of seeing no other human beings. Even so, they are separated from the rest of society, from family and friends, and from the places that once shaped everyday life. No one can visit, and no crew member can simply step outside to change the atmosphere. On Earth, a stressful day may end with a walk, a seat in a quiet cafe, or an open window letting in fresh air. Inside the spacecraft, the outer door leads directly into vacuum. Every need for rest, work, exercise, and social contact must be met within the same enclosed volume. The air is used again and again. The water someone drinks today may once have been moisture in another day's breath or sweat. The sound of fans, pumps, and life support systems never disappears completely, because absolute silence may mean that an essential machine has stopped working. At first, the steady noise fades easily into the background. After many months, some people no longer notice it, while others become increasingly sensitive to every small vibration. A subtle change in the rhythm of a fan may signal a malfunction, making it difficult for the brain to relax completely even while trying to sleep. Smell also remains part of the experience. In a closed environment, the odors of food, clothing, materials, cleaning products, and human bodies linger longer. The filtration system cleans the air, but it cannot reproduce the scent of soil after rain, growing plants, or a breeze moving through an open space. These absences may sound minor compared with the scale of the mission. Over hundreds of days, however, they become a quiet part of isolation. The mind misses not only people, but also the feeling of moving through a place larger than the body, where the view does not end at a wall only a few meters away. Repetition gradually removes the natural landmarks of time. The same corridor, familiar food packages, weekly inspection routines, and unchanging faces cause many days to blend together. A person may remember an event clearly, but struggle to decide whether it happened yesterday or 3 days earlier. Outside the window, the scenery changes only very slowly. Earth gradually grows smaller, Mars expands over many weeks, and for most of the journey there is only blackness and the stars. There is no first rain of the season, no crowded street at the weekend, and no shifting weather to tell the brain that a new phase has begun. The crew must create its own rhythm of life. Working hours, meals, exercise periods, and rest days are arranged with care. Small events, such as birthdays, anniversaries, or a special meal, help divide the journey into sections that are easier to feel and remember. Artificial light is also used to keep the body clock stable. The human body normally relies on cycles of light and darkness to regulate hormones, temperature, and alertness. Inside the spacecraft, the lighting system must take the place of sunrise and sunset, telling the brain when to wake and when to begin slowing down. If the light is too bright late in the day, the body may struggle to enter a state of sleep. If the morning light is not bright enough, fatigue can linger. Lighting design, therefore, does more than make the control panels easy to see. It directly affects the crew's biological rhythms. Sleep remains one of the most vulnerable parts of the journey. Astronauts on space missions are often given a sleep period longer than 6 hours, yet many studies have found that they actually sleep only about 6 hours each night. This is less than most adults need to maintain strong performance over long periods. A single 6-hour night may not create a crisis. The body can still work, communicate, and complete its tasks. But when that shortage repeats for weeks, concentration, short-term memory, and emotional regulation begin to change, even if the affected person does not fully notice it. Sleep deprivation does not always appear as someone falling asleep at the controls. The traveler may keep their eyes open and seem alert, yet need a few extra seconds to understand a warning. They may overlook a familiar step, misread a number, or forget why they have just opened a storage compartment. Working memory is particularly affected when sleep is insufficient. This is the ability to hold several pieces of information temporarily in the mind while completing a task. When it weakens, an astronaut may remember the first and final steps but lose the ones in between, especially during a long and stressful procedure. Reaction time also slows. The difference may be only a fraction of a second, too small to notice during ordinary activities. But when responding to a fire warning, gas leak, or loss of pressure, a series of very small delays can add together and lengthen the entire emergency response. The ability to judge one's own condition does not always remain accurate. Sleep-deprived people often feel that they have grown accustomed to being tired, even while tests show that their performance continues to decline. The brain adapts to the feeling of sleepiness more quickly than it recovers its speed and precision. Emotions also become more difficult to control. An ordinary comment may sound like criticism, a small noise may feel more irritating, and waiting for a crewmate to finish a task may seem longer than it truly is. Inside a confined spacecraft, one person's fatigue can quickly affect the entire group. Sleep medication may be used in certain situations, but it is not an ideal solution for every night. Someone who has taken a sleep aid must still be able to wake during an alarm, think clearly, and perform emergency procedures. Its effectiveness and side effects also vary from one body to another. Noise must be controlled from the earliest stages of spacecraft design. Life support systems cannot be turned off, but pumps and fans can be insulated, their vibrations reduced, or their locations moved away from sleeping areas. Sounds that cause no harm for a few hours may repeatedly fragment sleep when they return every night. A private sleeping compartment therefore becomes part of the health protection system. The space is usually very small, with only enough room for one person to secure a sleeping bag, store a few belongings, and close the door. Its value does not come from its size, but from its ability to create a boundary between the individual and the rest of the spacecraft. Inside that space, crew members do not need to maintain a composed expression in front of the others. They can listen to a recording from family, write in a journal, cry, or simply remain still for a few minutes. Privacy allows the mind to lower its guard, especially when every activity outside takes place under the eyes of crewmates and mission cameras. Personal space also gives small conflicts time to cool. On Earth, after an argument, people may leave the house, drive somewhere else, or meet a different group of friends. Inside the spacecraft, the greatest possible distance may be only a few meters beyond a thin partition. The person who has just made someone angry will still appear at the next meal. Both must continue sharing the same air, water, and equipment. They must also trust one another during tasks that may directly affect the safety of the entire crew. Conflict does not have to begin with a major problem. The way someone stores a tool, the sound of chewing, the length of time spent using exercise equipment, or the habit of talking while another person needs silence can all become sources of tension. Repetition makes small irritations harder to escape than they would be on Earth. Traits that help someone succeed may also create friction. A decisive person can respond quickly during a crisis but may be seen as controlling. A cautious crew member helps prevent mistakes but may make the group feel that every decision takes too long. A cheerful person can preserve morale, yet their humor may sometimes appear at the wrong moment. The goal is not to find a group that never disagrees. That would be nearly impossible during a mission lasting several years. The crew must learn to recognize tension early, express their needs clearly, and resolve conflict before it quietly divides the group into opposing sides. Brief meetings can be used to share updates about work, health, and anything causing discomfort. It is usually easier to discuss a problem while it is still small than to wait until frustration begins appearing in every response. Admitting fatigue or asking for quiet must not be treated as a sign of weakness. Leadership must also remain flexible. During a technical emergency, the person with the most relevant expertise needs to be heard, even if they are not the mission commander. When a crew member is experiencing a psychological crisis, a rigid command style may cause them to withdraw further instead of cooperating. The mood of the entire group is influenced by workload. Too little work can leave the days feeling empty, while an overloaded schedule reduces time for privacy and sleep. Mission planners must keep the crew busy enough to maintain a sense of purpose without constantly pushing them toward exhaustion. Isolation experiments on Earth have shown that group psychology often changes in stages. The early period is marked by excitement, followed by a time when the work becomes familiar. In the middle of a long mission, motivation may decline because the point of departure feels very far away, while the destination is still not close enough to create a sense of approaching the end. During the Mars 500 simulation, 6 people lived for more than 500 days inside a sealed complex designed to recreate part of a journey to Mars. They did not experience microgravity or deep space radiation, but they lived with confined space, repetitive schedules, and delayed communication. The results showed that the crew members responded in very different ways. Some maintained relatively stable sleep patterns, while others began sleeping longer or gradually drifted away from the shared schedule. Physical activity also declined in several participants as the mission continued, reflecting how both body and mind may conserve energy in a monotonous environment. A simulation cannot fully recreate the feeling of truly leaving Earth. The participants still knew that an exit was nearby. Medical teams could intervene, and their families were not actually millions of kilometers away. Even so, these studies help reveal problems before humans must face them in deep space. Research teams living in Antarctica also provide useful information. During winter, many stations remain isolated for months, with no flights arriving or departing and long periods of darkness. The people there still have gravity and a natural atmosphere, but the experience of being separated from society shares many similarities with an interplanetary journey. An informal idea known as the third quarter phenomenon is often discussed in long-duration isolated environments. After the beginning has passed, but before the end feels close enough, mood may decline, irritability may increase, and motivation can weaken. This does not happen to everyone, but it is a reminder that the middle of a journey may be more difficult than the early days. Psychological support from Earth remains important, even when it cannot happen in real time. Private conversations with specialists, messages from family, and new entertainment can reduce the feeling that everything has stopped changing. Yet the farther the crew travels from Earth, the more they must learn to recognize their own psychological condition. Sensors may track sleep, heart rate, and activity levels. Software may notice that a crew member is sleeping less or leaving their private compartment less often than before. Such information is useful only when handled carefully, because excessive monitoring can also create the feeling that personal life is always under observation. Trust determines whether a monitoring system becomes a source of support or a new source of stress. Astronauts need to know that the data are being used to protect their health, not to judge every ordinary emotion. One sad day is not a crisis, but a pattern lasting for many weeks deserves attention. Activities with personal meaning help preserve the feeling of being a human being rather than simply a component of the mission. Music, family photographs, books, films, and small hobbies create parts of life that are not measured by performance or schedules. Plants also have value far beyond the vegetables they produce. Their green color, the scent of leaves, and their daily growth bring a living cycle into a spacecraft dominated by machinery. Caring for a seedling helps travelers feel that time is moving forward rather than endlessly repeating itself. Seeing Earth from the International Space Station creates a unique psychological experience. The planet fills the window, and continents, oceans, and city lights remain visible. Even in orbit, astronauts can still see home as an immense world directly below them. On the way to Mars, that image changes. Earth grows smaller with each passing day. At first, its blue, white, and brown colors remain distinct. Later, the continents disappear, and the oceans merge into a tiny point of light. Eventually, home resembles little more than a slightly brighter star among countless others. Every city, every person, every forest, and every ocean exists within that small point. Distance is no longer simply a number displayed on the navigation screen. It becomes the feeling that the entire familiar world has grown small enough to be hidden behind a fingertip. The astronaut knows that Earth is still there, but the body receives no direct evidence of it beyond light that has taken many minutes to reach the window. In that moment, isolation takes on a deeper form. The travelers cannot only return home quickly, they can no longer speak with home in the same moment. Every voice comes from the past, and every reply belongs to a present that has already changed. The spacecraft must become the crew's home, workplace, control center, and only reachable community. Lighting, sound, rest schedules, private spaces, and the way people speak to one another all become part of the life support system. Clean air keeps the lungs working. Water keeps the cells alive. A stable psychological structure preserves the ability to make decisions, cooperate, and operate all those systems correctly. If teamwork collapses, the spacecraft may remain physically intact while the mission itself becomes unsafe. Distance therefore exists not only between Mars and Earth. It enters the waiting time, the short nights of sleep, and the arguments from which there is nowhere to walk away. It appears in the moment a traveler receives a message from family while knowing that the answer will not arrive immediately. When a system issues a warning, the crew sends all available data back to Earth. The best specialists will analyze it and respond, but the malfunction continues while light is still crossing the distance between worlds. The people aboard must act before they know what the ground team will recommend. When the problem involves machinery, they still have diagrams, spare parts, and backup procedures. When a crew member suddenly develops severe pain, loses consciousness, or struggles to breathe, the situation becomes far more difficult. The human body does not always behave according to a written manual. No ambulance can arrive. No hospital lies beyond the next door. Doctors on Earth can provide guidance, but they cannot place a hand on the patient or adjust an instrument in real time. When Earth can no longer answer immediately, the spacecraft must become its own hospital. The people trained to pilot the vehicle, repair equipment, and conduct research must also know how to examine, diagnose, and save a crewmate using only the limited medicines and instruments carried aboard. The pain begins during an otherwise ordinary moment. A crew member is checking the water monitoring display when they suddenly stop, press a hand against the right side of the abdomen, and curl inward while floating. At first, the sensation is only a dull ache, but within minutes it becomes sharper, spreads lower, and makes it impossible to focus on a crewmate's questions. On Earth, pain like this usually begins a familiar sequence of events. The patient is taken to a clinic, examined by a doctor, given blood tests, and scanned with several types of imaging equipment. If the condition is serious, an operating room and an entire team of specialists are ready nearby. Halfway to Mars, that chain of support does not exist. The pain may come from intestinal gas, constipation, or a meal that did not agree with the body. It could also be related to a kidney stone, appendicitis, an infection, or a condition requiring immediate treatment. From outside the body, very different causes can begin with exactly the same symptom. The crew cannot call an ambulance. No hospital lies beyond the next door, and turning the spacecraft around is nothing like changing the direction of a car on a road. The vehicle is following a trajectory calculated in advance, determined by the positions of the two planets, the available fuel, and the speed it has already reached. Even if a decision is made to return, the journey may still take many months. NASA's Mars exploration plans treat this as an environment where medical evacuation is nearly impossible and resupply cannot be relied upon as it can in low Earth orbit. Communication delays, periods of lost contact, and missions lasting from 1 to 3 years require the healthcare system to operate with a far greater degree of independence. The crew member with medical expertise moves closer, asking where the pain is located, when it began, and what the patient has eaten that day. Heart rate, blood pressure, temperature, and blood oxygen levels are checked. Each answer helps eliminate certain possibilities, but no single measurement is enough to reveal exactly what is happening deep within the abdomen. On Earth, a doctor might order a CT scan or an MRI. These machines produce highly detailed images, but they are too large, heavy, and energy-intensive to be an easy choice aboard an interplanetary spacecraft. Space for medical equipment must compete with water, food, spare parts, and life support systems. For this reason, the most valuable tool may not be the most advanced machine, but one capable of performing many different tasks. NASA is developing integrated systems that can monitor vital signs, analyze biological samples, and provide diagnostic imaging within a smaller configuration. Ultrasound has a particularly important role because it uses no ionizing radiation and can examine the heart, blood vessels, eyes, muscles, kidneys, bladder, and many regions of the abdomen. A crew member removes the ultrasound unit from its storage compartment, secures the patient, and applies a layer of gel to the skin. There is no examination table in the familiar sense, so both people must keep themselves from drifting while the probe moves across the body. On the screen, layers of tissue appear as shifting regions of light and shadow that change continuously with the angle of the hand. Ultrasound does not provide an answer simply because the machine has been switched on. The operator must know where to place the probe, how to tilt it, and how to distinguish a normal structure from a potentially dangerous sign. A difference of only a few centimeters may produce an image of another organ entirely or miss the region that needs to be examined. What is remarkable is that people without advanced training can still produce useful images when given the right guidance. In one study, participants with no ultrasound experience used audiovisual instructions to examine their own carotid arteries and eyes. 8 of 10 carotid examinations and 17 of 18 eye images were judged to be of diagnostic quality. Those results open an important possibility for a journey to Mars. The crew does not need to turn every member into a medical specialist, but each person must know how to collect data well enough to support a decision. Instructional videos, 3-dimensional models, and image recognition software may partly replace the hands of a specialist who is not aboard the spacecraft. On the International Space Station, doctors on Earth have guided astronauts through ultrasound examinations almost in real time. They watch the images and ask the astronaut to rotate the probe or adjust the pressure until the required area came into view. This method has shown that people who are not physicians can still perform many examinations with real clinical value. The distance to Mars removes the greatest advantage of that approach. A minor instruction may not arrive for more than 20 minutes, by which time the probe has already been stored and the patient's condition may have changed. Software aboard the spacecraft must therefore recognize when an image has been captured at the wrong angle, mark suspicious structures, and recommend the next step without waiting for mission control. It cannot be allowed to make decisions blindly on behalf of the crew. Medical data are rarely completely clear, and real bodies do not always behave like the examples in a manual. The best support system must explain its reasoning, present the possible causes, and indicate how certain it is, allowing the crew to weigh that information against the signs they are observing. The most difficult situation arises when the person lying unconscious is the crew member with the greatest medical knowledge. The others cannot stand around waiting for the doctor to wake up and save themselves. They must check the airway, assess circulation, administer medication, and operate the equipment using skills learned before the mission. NASA currently requires astronauts to train in basic medical skills such as resuscitation, injections, wound suturing, and the treatment of dental problems. Projects focused on autonomous medical support are developing software capable of offering diagnostic recommendations and emergency procedures when specialists on Earth cannot respond in time. Cross-training does not turn everyone into a doctor. It creates enough redundancy that life-saving knowledge is not contained entirely within a single mind. The engineer must still know how to place an intravenous line, the biology specialist must be able to treat a burn, and the commander must recognize when pain has progressed beyond something that can simply be monitored. Even a minor illness carries a different meaning inside a sealed environment. A small cut may heal more slowly if the immune system is changing. A burn from a hot surface may prevent someone from using their hand to repair equipment. A toothache can disrupt sleep for several nights, leading to slower reactions and less accurate decisions. Exercise injuries cannot be treated lightly either. Training equipment produces significant force inside a confined cabin, while muscles and bones continue changing from month to month. One incorrect movement may strain a muscle, injure a joint, or cause back pain, forcing a crew member to reduce activity at the very moment the body needs exercise to resist muscle loss. On Earth, allergies are usually managed with medication and by avoiding the source of irritation. Inside the spacecraft, the allergen may be circulating through the air, present in a material, or contained in food for which no replacement exists. Infections are also more difficult to control when everyone shares the same surfaces, water, and enclosed microbial ecosystem. Another problem begins with the medicines already carried aboard the spacecraft. The medical supply cannot contain every possible drug in unlimited quantities. NASA has developed exploration mission formularies containing more than 200 pharmaceuticals, but the presence of a medication in storage does not guarantee that it will still be suitable when needed several years later. Medicines are chemical formulations designed to remain stable under specific conditions. Time, temperature, humidity, packaging, and radiation can all affect their active ingredients. Liquid formulations are generally more sensitive, but tablets are not completely unchanging simply because they remain dry and retain their original shape. A pill may still have its familiar color, show no cracks, and carry no unusual odor. Yet the active ingredient inside may gradually decline, meaning the dose printed on the packaging no longer accurately reflects the amount the body receives. At the same time, degradation products must also be evaluated to determine whether they could cause unwanted effects. Experience in low Earth orbit has been fairly reassuring so far, but it does not answer every question about deep space. Some studies have found that most medications lost less than 20% of their active ingredients, while a group of pharmaceuticals monitored for 550 days aboard the station declined by only about 5 to 10%. NASA has also emphasized that the radiation environment beyond Earth's magnetosphere, longer mission durations, and the absence of resupply will create very different conditions. The greatest challenge is the mismatch between mission duration and ordinary shelf life. Exploration missions may last from 1 to 5 years, while many medications currently have an average shelf life of only about 1 or 2 years. Some of the pharmaceuticals aboard the spacecraft could expire before the crew even begins the return journey. An expiration date does not mean that a medication suddenly becomes ineffective the following day. Many drugs on Earth remain stable beyond the date printed on the package when stored properly. The problem is that the crew cannot simply assume this when the correct dose may directly affect survival and the storage environment is unlike that of a pharmacy on the ground. Each medication requires its own profile, how stable the active ingredient remains, which formulation is most suitable, how effectively the packaging resists moisture, and how much radiation reaches its storage location. An antibiotic, a pain reliever, an injectable solution, and a hormone cannot all be evaluated according to one simple rule. The medical inventory must also know exactly what remains in storage. During an emergency, locating a vial of medication should not become a search through dozens of compartments. NASA is studying automated medical inventory systems that can quickly identify the location, quantity, expiration date, and priority of every item. Some medicines may need to be used earlier to avoid waste, while the most critical supplies should be kept in the best protected locations. Radiation, heat from equipment, and humidity near the water system are not distributed evenly throughout the spacecraft. The arrangement of medications therefore becomes part of medical design, much like positioning water around a radiation shelter. The solution cannot simply be to carry large quantities of backup medication. Every package has mass, occupies space, and may never be used. Carrying too little creates the risk of shortages, while carrying too much takes space away from food, repair equipment, and other essential resources. This question leads to an idea that once belonged almost entirely to science fiction. Instead of bringing every medication from Earth, the spacecraft might produce some of them when needed. Such a system could store cells, enzymes, or raw materials that remain stable for longer periods, then manufacture the active ingredient at the time of use. NASA has funded research into an astropharmacy, a small-scale system for producing and purifying medicines using cell-based or cell-free platforms. Its goals include manufacturing drugs in the correct quantity and purity, testing their biological activity, and reducing the process to a lightweight microfluidic device. This remains an area of development, not a complete pharmaceutical factory ready to be installed aboard every spacecraft. The difficulty lies not only in creating the desired molecule. The product must be purified, measured at the correct dose, and tested to ensure that it contains no dangerous contaminants. A facility on Earth may use several separate laboratories for these steps. A spacecraft would need to perform them inside one compact device, using little water and producing as little waste as possible. Some medicines are easier to produce than others. Complex biological molecules require living cells, culture media, and strict quality control. A system that manufactures drugs on demand is therefore more likely to supplement a traditional medical inventory than replace it entirely in the near future. Intravenous fluids present a similar challenge. Carrying enough fluid bags for every possible situation would add considerable mass, even though purified water is already available through the spacecraft's recycling system. NASA is studying ways to produce sterile IV fluids during flight, allowing the vehicle's water supply to become a medical resource when needed. This level of independence would not turn the spacecraft into a fully equipped hospital. Surgery would remain a major challenge in microgravity, where blood and other fluids do not fall but may form droplets that drift through the cabin. The instruments, patient, and medical operator would all need to be secured, while the risk of contaminating the air system would have to be controlled. Even when a procedure succeeds, the care that follows consumes additional resources. The patient needs medication, nutrition, sleep, and time to recover. In a small crew, losing one working member means the others must divide that person's responsibilities among themselves, at the very moment psychological pressure is increasing. Deep space medicine therefore places a strong emphasis on prevention. The best way to manage a kidney stone is to reduce the chance that one will form. The safest response to muscle atrophy is not to wait until the traveler can no longer stand, but to exercise consistently from the first days of the mission. Every treadmill session is a medical intervention for the bones, muscles, and cardiovascular system. Every eye examination helps detect SANs before small text becomes too difficult to read. Measuring blood pressure, monitoring sleep, and recording food intake do more than generate research data. They reveal how quickly the body may be moving away from a safe condition. Cleaning the cabin is also part of healthcare. Wiping surfaces, replacing filters, and inspecting the water system help prevent the microbial community from growing beyond control. A task that appears to be routine maintenance is actually reducing the risk of infection for the entire crew. Radiation monitors also belong to the medical system, even though they never touch a patient directly. Sensor data determine who must enter the storm shelter, which external activities must be canceled, and which sleeping locations receive a lower dose. Preventive medicine may sometimes begin with the way the spacecraft is oriented in space. Food is a slow-acting pharmacy used every day. Protein provides material for muscles and immune cells. Calcium and vitamin D support the skeleton, while iron, vitamin B12, and folate contribute to the production of red blood cells. No nutrient works in isolation. Someone who consumes too little energy will struggle to exercise at sufficient intensity, recover muscle more slowly, and lose endurance. Sleep deprivation further disrupts appetite and emotional control, causing problems that once seemed separate to become connected. Food intake cannot be monitored simply by counting the packages that have been opened. An astronaut may finish every meal yet absorb nutrients poorly because of digestive problems. Another may leave only a small amount uneaten each time, creating a significant deficiency over many months before body weight reveals the change. The medical system must view the body as a network. Back pain may cause a traveler to skip exercise, accelerating muscle loss. Disrupted sleep may reduce the precision with which someone operates an ultrasound probe. A medication that causes drowsiness may help with rest, but slow reactions if an alarm sounds during the night. This is why medical preparation cannot consist of placing a large first aid kit aboard the spacecraft and considering the job complete. The mission requires trained people, adaptable equipment, reliable software, carefully monitored medications, nutritious food, and preventive routines maintained every day. Returning to the crew member with abdominal pain, the ultrasound image finally becomes clear enough to interpret. There is no definite sign of appendicitis, but an area near the kidney draws the group's attention. The patient receives additional fluids, takes medication according to procedure, and remains under continuous observation while the data travel back toward Earth. The doctors on the ground will respond after many minutes. Before that answer arrives, the crew must already decide whether the patient may eat, which medication is safe, and when they should begin preparing for a more serious outcome. Support from Earth remains invaluable, but the life immediately before them depends on the people inside the cabin. Not every case ends with a frightening diagnosis. The pain may ease, the measurements may return to stable levels, and the patient may resume work after several days. The importance of the situation lies in what it reveals. A minor symptom on Earth can become a test of the entire system when the nearest hospital is millions of kilometers away. Humans have lived continuously in microgravity near Earth for more than a year. Astronauts have drawn their own blood, operated ultrasound equipment, treated injuries, and performed many forms of medical monitoring in orbit. These experiences provide an important foundation, but they have all occurred close enough for rapid support and a relatively early return home. No one has ever experienced the complete sequence of a Mars mission: deep space, interplanetary radiation, months of microgravity, gravity at 38% of Earth's level, a long stay on the surface, and the journey home will all pass through the same body in succession. A method that works well aboard the space station may not remain equally useful after medications have been stored for years and communications have been interrupted. A body that remains healthy after 6 months may not respond the same way after 3 years. Deep space medicine is still preparing for a patient that history has never encountered. The most important hospital aboard the spacecraft is therefore not contained within a single room. It is distributed across the knowledge of every crew member, the software inside the computers, the medicines stored in compartments, the food in storage, and the daily habits used to care for the body. When the person with the greatest expertise can no longer help, all the remaining parts must connect quickly enough to replace them. Advanced equipment has value only when someone knows how to use it. A medicine that remains effective is still useless if no one recognizes when it should be given. Many months later, the pain has passed, and Mars begins to fill the window. Features that once appeared only as patches of color become clearer, signaling that the spacecraft is approaching the end of its outbound journey. Microgravity is about to disappear, but that may not be good news for a body that has learned to live without weight. Blood, the heart, bones, muscles, eyes, and the balance system are all operating according to new rules. The most difficult moment may no longer be living while weightless. It is waiting below. When the landing engines fall silent, Martian gravity pulls the body downward, and the astronaut must perform a movement that once felt so natural that no one ever thought about it. The landing engines gradually reduce their thrust, and then shut down completely. The final vibrations pass through the floor of the spacecraft, while red dust continues swirling around the landing legs outside. A metal clip that has just slipped from the control panel no longer hovers in the cabin. It falls to the floor with a faint tap. That small sound announces a change far greater than it appears. After thousands of hours of floating freely, the body has weight again. The feet are pulled downward, the head places a load on the neck, and the torso presses against the hips. The downward direction that had vanished from sensation now returns clearly, without any need for the eyes or instruments to confirm it. Gravity on the surface of Mars is only about 38% as strong as the gravity humans know on Earth. A person with a mass of 100 kilograms still has the same mass, but the force pressing them against the floor is equivalent to the weight of about 38 kilograms under Earth gravity. That load may sound light, but the person who has just landed no longer has the same body they carried away from the launch pad. The bones have lost some of their material, the postural muscles have grown smaller, and the volume of fluid in the bloodstream has declined. The heart has become accustomed to working without pushing blood against gravity, while the balance system has learned not to place complete trust in the inner ear. Mars pulls with little more than 1/3 of Earth's gravity, but it is pulling on a body adapted to an environment with almost no weight at all. When the seat restraints are released, the astronaut braces with their hands and begins lifting the torso. The shoulders and arms immediately have to support part of the body's weight, while the abdominal muscles keep it from falling forward. Even raising the head feels unfamiliar because a head that floated almost weightlessly for months is now pulling down on the neck every second. On Earth, the neck muscles work quietly from morning until night. They keep the head upright while walking, turn the face toward a sound, lower the gaze toward the feet, and raise it again. During the journey, most of that work nearly disappeared. When weight returns, a part of the body that once seemed unremarkable must suddenly work continuously from the very first minute. The spine also begins receiving compression again. The discs between the vertebrae, which expanded in microgravity, are placed under load, while the back muscles must restore the curves that help keep the torso upright. The hip bones receive pressure from the upper body. The knees and ankles must stabilize joints that have not supported a standing person for many months. At the same time, blood is pulled toward the lower body. The vessels in the legs must constrict, the heart must beat faster, and the nervous system must regulate blood pressure to maintain flow to the brain. If the response is not fast enough, vision begins to darken, the head feels light, and breathing becomes quicker, even though the traveler has only just left the seat. NASA considers the inability to maintain blood pressure while standing after spaceflight a direct risk to operations immediately after landing on another planet. The inner ear begins receiving a signal that has been absent for months. The structures that detect gravity report that the head is above, the feet are below, and the body is leaning at a particular angle. The brain must once again include this information in its map of movement, even though it learned during the flight to rely more heavily on vision, handrails, and the position of equipment. None of these systems is allowed to adapt one at a time. Blood does not wait for the leg muscles to regain strength before moving downward. The spine does not wait for the inner ear to stabilize before accepting compression. Within seconds, the heart, blood vessels, muscles, bones, eyes, and brain must all shift into a new state together. The first step, therefore, looks nothing like a traveler rising smoothly and walking straight toward the hatch. The knees may tremble, the feet may land imprecisely, and the torso may sway sideways after only a small movement. Each turn of the head may cause the surroundings to shift in a way the brain has not yet learned to interpret. Studies of astronauts returning from long-duration missions show that balance, walking, and tasks requiring postural control are often most impaired immediately after landing. In heel-to-toe walking tests along a straight line, returning crew members performed significantly worse during the first 24 hours than they had before flight. With the eyes open, travelers can still use the lines and surfaces of the cabin to maintain orientation. If vision is blocked or the lighting is dim, they must rely more heavily on the inner ear and sensations from the feet. This is when the body is most likely to reveal that those systems are not yet coordinating as smoothly as before. Post-flight testing has also recorded changes in how the brain processes vestibular signals, leading to temporary declines in standing and walking ability. Reflexes connected to the gravity-sensing organs of the inner ear may require several days to return close to their pre-flight levels. Experiences after returning to Earth cannot predict every sensation on Mars with complete accuracy. Gravity at 0.38 g is much weaker than 1 g, and a Martian landing cabin will differ from a vehicle returning from orbit. Even so, the data reveal the work the body must perform: supporting the head, stabilizing vision, controlling the feet, and maintaining blood pressure during movement. Even astronauts who exercise regularly throughout the flight may struggle with tasks requiring dynamic balance. Running, cycling, and resistance training help protect muscle and endurance, but they do not fully recreate the constant postural adjustments required in gravity. NASA has concluded that strength and aerobic training alone are not enough to completely prevent impairment in tasks that demand balance while moving. The astronaut will not simply stand up in lightweight clothing. Before leaving the spacecraft, they must put on a protective suit, check its seals, carry a life support system, and attach the necessary tools. Mars reduces the suit's weight, but its mass and inertia remain unchanged. A suit with substantial mass still resists changes in motion. When the astronaut turns, that mass continues pulling in the previous direction. When they stop, the muscles of the legs and torso must absorb the movement. Feeling lighter does not mean the object becomes easy to control in every situation. The suit's joints also restrict how far the wearer can bend, twist, or lift a leg. To look down at a low step, the astronaut may not be able to simply bend the neck as usual. At times, the entire upper body must lean forward, changing signals from the eyes, inner ear, and body all at once. The distance from the seat to the hatch may be only a few meters, but every step is a test. The foot must land accurately, the thigh muscles must control the knee, and the torso must remain upright while the hands carry equipment. If dizziness increases, the astronaut cannot simply sit down anywhere because the bulky suit and confined cabin restrict movement. The greatest danger may not appear during a carefully prepared walk. It lies in an emergency that forces the crew to move quickly. The spacecraft may tilt after landing, a pipe may begin leaking, smoke may appear, or the life support system may issue a warning. In that moment, the travelers must leave their seats, retrieve equipment, open the hatch, and move across uneven terrain before their bodies have completed the transition. If one crew member is injured, the others may also have to drag or lift that person, even though their own muscles and circulatory systems are experiencing weight for the first time in months. NASA is studying the ability to perform realistic mission tasks immediately after long-duration flight. Simulations include putting on a suit, exiting through a spacecraft hatch, descending a ladder, handling cables, and carrying equipment across sandy, rocky terrain under loads designed to resemble Martian gravity. Early data suggests that astronauts can still complete many of these tasks, but the number of participants remains small, and research is continuing to define safe limits. This question directly affects spacecraft design. If the crew cannot leave the vehicle immediately, the landing cabin must remain safe enough for them to stay inside while recovering. Hatches, ladders, and equipment locations must be designed for people who may be dizzy, physically weak, or struggling to control a suit, rather than assuming they will emerge with the same mobility they had before the mission. Every handrail inside the cabin may become protection against a fall. Lower steps reduce the force required from the knees. Automated cargo systems can keep the crew from lifting heavy loads during the first hours. Robots deployed in advance may inspect the area, connect power, and prepare the habitat before the humans open the hatch. The success of the landing is therefore measured by more than the distance between the spacecraft and its target coordinates. A vehicle that reaches the correct location but leaves its crew unable to exit the cabin has not yet completed the mission. The final stage of the flight lies within the human ability to stand up and continue moving. Outside, red dust covers small rocks and slopes that are difficult to see clearly. Low gravity makes each step longer, but inertia can carry the body farther than expected. The traveler must learn a new way of walking, somewhere between the heavy steps of Earth and the floating motion inside the spacecraft. If they push too hard, the body moves farther forward. When they stumble, the fall lasts slightly longer, but that does not necessarily make it easier to regain balance. The bulky suit shifts the center of mass, while the helmet and chest assembly restrict the view of the feet. A fall in 0.38 g produces less impact force than a similar fall on Earth. Getting back up may still be difficult because the suit retains substantial mass and its joints restrict movement. The person lying on the ground must rotate the body, bring the knees into the correct position, and push upward with the arms while the balance system is still unstable. A decline of a few percent may seem minor in a laboratory. On a cold, dusty surface, with no rescue team nearby, the same loss may be enough to slow the closing of a valve, the carrying of an oxygen tank, or the return of an injured crewmate to shelter. Physical strength here is not about performance. It creates additional time before a dangerous situation becomes irreversible. After the first several hours, the body begins adapting to Mars. Every step sends force through the legs and into the hips. The heart practices delivering blood to the brain while standing. The inner ear continues recalibrating the direction of down, and the neck muscles gradually become accustomed to the weight of the head. Partial gravity certainly provides more mechanical signals than microgravity. However, no human being has ever lived continuously for months at 0.38 g. NASA reports acknowledge that the long-term effects of Martian gravity on the cardiovascular system, muscles, bones, and many other functions remain unknown. Parabolic flights can create simulated Martian gravity for only a few dozen seconds. Body support experiments, prolonged bed rest studies, and animal models reproduce only part of the phenomenon. They help scientists identify questions and test equipment, but they cannot replace data from a person living for months under 0.38 g. Martian gravity may significantly slow the loss of muscle and bone. It is also possible that this level of force will not fully protect weight-bearing regions, requiring the crew to continue intense exercise on the surface. Science does not yet know the minimum gravitational threshold each organ system needs to remain healthy. Do bones need brief periods at 1 g each day, or would a lower force maintained for many hours be enough? How will the cardiovascular system respond after a week under Martian gravity? Will fluid still remain concentrated toward the head and continue affecting the eyes, or will 0.38 g be enough to pull them downward? The questions become even deeper if humans remain there for years. An adult body that developed on Earth may adapt in one way, while children growing up under low gravity might develop bones, muscles, hearts, and balance systems in an entirely different state. No direct data exist to answer these questions. The first footprint on Mars will therefore be more than a symbol of exploration. The moment the foot bears weight, sensors inside the suit will begin recording force, heart rate, blood pressure, and movement. The traveler's body will become the first continuous biological experiment conducted under the gravity of the red planet. Each day on the surface will expand that dataset. How quickly walking improves, where bone density stops declining, how blood volume changes, and how vision responds will all help answer questions that no laboratory on Earth can fully reproduce. To help travelers arrive in better condition, artificial gravity is often considered one of the most promising approaches. If the entire spacecraft, or part of its living area, rotates around an axis, centrifugal force can press the body outward, creating a sense of weight and a surface that feels like a floor. Inside a sufficiently large rotating structure, astronauts could stand, walk, and exercise under load throughout the journey. The bones would receive force through the legs, blood would be drawn toward the lower body, and the balance system would continue working with a stable downward direction. Artificial gravity could therefore help protect several organ systems at the same time. The trade-off is that the spacecraft would need to be larger or use extended connecting structures. The rotating system would have to withstand force, remain balanced, and operate reliably for many months. Docking, adjusting the trajectory, and performing repairs would also become more complicated while part of the vehicle was rotating continuously. A small centrifuge would be a more compact option. An astronaut could lie or sit on a rotating arm for a certain amount of time each day. Because the feet would be farther from the center of rotation than the head, they would experience a stronger force, creating a gravity gradient along the body. A short radius requires a higher rotation rate, which may cause the inner ear to receive uncomfortable signals when the user turns their head. The body may gradually adapt, but tolerance differs from one person to another. The device would also have to share limited space with sleeping areas, storage, medical equipment, and exercise machines. The greatest challenge is not simply building a rotating machine. Science has not yet fully determined the required dose of gravity. How strong it should be, how long it should last, how many times it should be repeated each day, and how it should be combined with physical activity. NASA considers human experience with artificial gravity in space too limited to establish a definitive force level, rotation speed, or exposure duration for a crewed spacecraft. 1 hour at 1 g may not be equivalent to an entire day at 0.38 g. A short but intense period of loading might protect the bones, while the cardiovascular system may require a gentler force sustained for longer. The eyes and fluid distribution may respond according to a different schedule than the muscles. This is why artificial gravity is promising, but not yet a complete solution. It may be the only countermeasure capable of affecting many systems simultaneously, but the engineering demands and biological uncertainties remain too great to treat it as a simple feature that can merely be installed aboard a spacecraft. Whatever solution is used, Mars will not be the final environment the body must face. After living on the surface, the crew must leave the planet and enter weightlessness once again. The adaptations newly formed under 0.38 g will be forced to change. The return journey will last several more months. The body will once again reduce the load on the bones, shift fluids toward the head, and rebuild a spatial map without a downward direction. At the end of that journey, the full gravity of Earth will be waiting. The environment that originally shaped the human body may become the strongest load the crew has experienced in years. Someone accustomed to 0.38 g will feel more than 2.5 times heavier upon returning to 1 g, even before accounting for the changes accumulated during the flight home. The circulatory system must keep blood flowing to the brain under the full pull of gravity. The bones bear greater loads, the neck muscles support a heavier head, and the inner ear receives a signal stronger than anything it has experienced since leaving Earth. Adaptation begins once again, proving that the challenge lies not in any single environment, but in repeatedly moving between different worlds. The body does not fail in space. On the contrary, it adapts with astonishing precision. The brain learns to live without a downward direction. The kidneys reduce fluid volume when blood shifts into the chest. The heart adjusts to a lighter workload. The bones remove material, and the muscles shrink when they no longer need to hold the body upright. The eyes change shape under a new distribution of fluids. The immune system, gene activity, and microbial community all respond to the enclosed environment. The mind learns to live with delay, repetition, and a distance that cannot be crossed immediately. Every individual change follows a logic. The body is conserving energy, adjusting to new loads, and searching for the state best suited to the place where it currently lives. The problem arises because the environment changes again before that process is complete. Earth shaped the human body under 1 g. The spacecraft carries it into microgravity. Mars requires it to function at 0.38 g, and the return journey draws it back into weightlessness before the full weight of home appears once more. To carry humans through this sequence of transitions, the spacecraft must contain more than engines and fuel. It must provide loading for the bones, resistance for the muscles, light that helps the brain preserve its daily rhythm, and private space where the mind can rest. It must provide clean air, recycled water, food that remains nutritious, medicines that retain their effectiveness, and equipment that allows the people aboard to treat one another. Water and supplies must also become shielding against the invisible rain of radiation beyond Earth's magnetic field. In this sense, the spacecraft does not merely carry humans to Mars, it carries a carefully selected part of Earth with them. The forces, rhythms, nutrients, and conditions that have kept the human body functioning since our species first appeared. A good spacecraft does more than deliver its crew to the correct coordinates. It must preserve enough traces of life under gravity that, after many months drifting through space, the people inside are still able to stand. The red dust outside the window slowly begins to settle. Ahead lies a cold plain stretching toward the horizon, with no trees, oceans, or winds like those of home. Earth no longer appears as a planet. It is only a point of light somewhere among countless stars. The hatch opens. The traveler extends 1 foot outside and slowly places it on the red soil. The hip bones receive a load. The leg muscles tighten. Blood is pulled downward, and the inner ear confirms that below exists once again. That footprint does more than prove that a machine has crossed the distance between 2 planets. It shows that a body shaped by Earth's oceans, atmosphere, and gravity has survived millions of kilometers and begun learning how to carry its weight on a new world. The first footprint now rests in the red dust. Outside, the Martian plain stretches beneath a thin, cold sky, while the spacecraft stands motionless behind it like a small piece of Earth placed upon another world. That moment is often seen as a triumph of engines, orbital mechanics, and landing technology. Yet before the foot ever touched the ground, another journey had already unfolded in silence inside the traveler's body. For many months, the body did more than endure space. It learned how to live there. The brain stopped searching for a fixed downward direction and gradually relied more heavily on vision and the reference points inside the cabin. The heart adjusted to a lighter workload once blood was no longer constantly pulled toward the legs. Bones removed material from regions bearing little load, while muscles grew smaller because they no longer had to keep the body upright. These changes can easily be seen as signs that the body is weakening. From another perspective, they reveal the extraordinary adaptability of the human body. It does not preserve every structure at any cost. It observes the environment through mechanical, chemical, and neurological signals, then redistributes energy toward the functions that are needed most. That same ability to adjust once helped humans survive on high mountains, in hot deserts, across frozen polar regions, and within vastly different climates. The body changes breathing, circulation, metabolism, and behavior to keep life stable. Space simply pushes that ability toward a more distant limit, where fundamental conditions such as gravity, natural light, and connection to the human community are no longer the same. The difficulty of a journey to Mars does not come from the body being unable to adapt. The problem is that it must adapt too many times within a relatively short period. First comes Earth's gravity, followed by the powerful acceleration of launch. Then microgravity continues for thousands of hours before Martian gravity appears at the end of the journey. When the surface mission is over, the body leaves 0.38 g and returns to weightlessness during the flight home. Finally, the full gravity of Earth returns. Each environment requires a different distribution of blood, a different level of muscular activity, a different map of balance, and a different load upon the skeleton. No system experiences these transitions alone. Fluid shifting toward the head changes the face while also affecting the eyes and blood flow through the veins of the neck. Bone releases calcium into the bloodstream, increasing the risk of kidney stones. Weaker muscles make exercise more difficult, while the heart and circulatory system are also losing some of their ability to respond to an upright posture. Sleep deprivation does more than make the traveler tired. It slows reactions, makes working memory less stable, weakens emotional control, and disturbs the balance of the immune system. Radiation reaches the cells while the body is also dealing with stress, limited nutrition, a sealed environment, and viruses that may have remained dormant for many years. The most difficult journey, therefore, does not exist entirely within the millions of kilometers between 2 planets. It unfolds across the tiny distances inside the body, from the inner ear to the brain, from the bloodstream to the tissues behind the eyes, from the bone marrow to each red blood cell, and from the muscles down to the feet struggling to keep a human being upright. A successful Mars spacecraft needs more than powerful engines and a durable hull. It must carry the conditions the body requires to keep from changing beyond a state from which it can recover. Resistance for the muscles, loading for the bones, light that preserves the sleep cycle, food that remains nutritious, and private space where the mind can rest all become essential parts of the vehicle. Water sustains life while also helping shield the crew from radiation. Exercise equipment is also medical equipment. A sleeping compartment is not only a place to rest, but a system that protects biological rhythms and psychological health. Software must do more than control machinery. It must also help the crew examine, monitor, and treat one another when doctors on Earth cannot respond immediately. In this sense, the spacecraft must carry part of Earth with it, not its soil, oceans, or entire sky, but the forces, rhythms, and conditions that have quietly shaped the human body over millions of years. The farther the journey travels, the more clearly the importance of these seemingly ordinary things begins to appear. When the traveler places a foot on Mars, two vessels have completed the journey together. The metal spacecraft outside has crossed vacuum, radiation, and distance. The biological vessel within has kept the brain, heart, blood, bones, muscles, eyes, and mind functioning through an environment for which evolution never prepared them. The footprint in the red dust therefore proves more than humanity's ability to build machines powerful enough to reach another planet. It proves that the body can still carry weight, maintain balance, and move forward after spending many months in a state with no downward direction. Human beings may reach Mars through engines, fuel, and precise calculations. But to open the hatch and step outside under their own power, they will need something deeper. The body must survive long enough to still remember how to be a body with weight.